As the cold nights of winter settle in, there's something undeniably haunting about the way the world slows down. The darkness wraps itself around the edges of our lives, and yet, for centuries, this very darkness was something people learned to embrace, to understand, and even to celebrate. Imagine a time when the winter solstice wasn't just a fleeting moment, but the highlight of the year. A moment so powerful that cultures across the globe marked its arrival with grand festivals, intricate rituals, and heartfelt prayers. The night, long and silent, was not something to fear. It was a time to reconnect with the earth, with the cosmos, and with the deepest parts of the human spirit. But where did these customs go? What happened to the centuries-old practices that once defined the winter months? The truth is, they've largely faded into the shadows of history. The ancient customs that once helped people navigate the darkness, those long nights of cold and isolation, are barely remembered today. What was once a vibrant tapestry of ritual, community, and spiritual connection has now become little more than a footnote in the vast sea of forgotten traditions. For centuries, from the icy north of Scandinavia to the deserts of Egypt, winter rituals were woven into the fabric of daily life. Ancient Egyptians celebrated the rebirth of the sun, while the Norse honored the longest night with fire and feast, believing the return of the sun marked the beginning of new life. In Rome, the festival of Saturnalia blurred the lines between master and servant as they all celebrated together in a rare moment of social equality. These traditions were as diverse as the cultures that practiced them, but they shared a common thread. The solstice was not just a moment in time. It was a gateway to something deeper, something spiritual, something far greater than mere survival. And yet, if you look at the winter solstice today, it seems almost forgotten. A day that once signified a cosmic shift, a global moment of unity, is now little more than a shadow in the corner of the calendar. Instead of vibrant celebrations, there are mostly fleeting mentions, Christmas lights, New Year's parties, and an empty, commercialized space where a deeper, older tradition once lived. The solstice has been reduced to something we observe in passing, as if its significance has been erased, deliberately or not, from the cultural consciousness. But why? How did we lose these ancient practices? What caused them to slip away into the quiet, hidden corners of history? Was it simply the passage of time, or was there something more forces at work, perhaps, pushing us to forget? This question lingers, unanswered, as we look back at those ancient rituals and wonder what they might reveal about us today. What could we learn from these long-lost traditions that once held such power? And, more importantly, is it possible that we are, in some way, being pulled back toward them? As we delve deeper into the mysteries of winter, one thing becomes clear. The story of these vanished traditions is far from over. It is a story still unfolding, waiting for us to look deeper, to ask the right questions, and to begin rediscovering what was once lost. But what happened to these practices? What forces of change swept them away? To answer that, we must first understand the transitions that shaped our world, leaving behind the traditions of winter like ghosts in the wind. Winter in ancient times was not merely a season, it was a test of endurance, a relentless stretch of cold and darkness that could break even the most resilient among us. And so, in the depths of that bleakness, the ancient world found ways to create light literally and metaphorically. Winter traditions weren't just about celebrating the return of the sun or offering warmth in the cold. They were survival mechanisms, the glue that held communities together when isolation and darkness threatened to unravel them. Take the ancient Romans, for instance. Saturnalia, their most famous winter festival, was held at the close of the year, a celebration of the god Saturn that spanned several days. It was a festival of feasting, games, and revelry, but its significance ran much deeper. It was, in many ways, a safety valve, an opportunity for people to come together and temporarily break the rigid social hierarchies that dominated everyday life. Masters would serve meals to their servants, and there would be general merrymaking, creating a sense of unity in a time when the natural world seemed determined to divide everyone through the long, cold nights. But Saturnalia was more than just a joyous occasion. The festival fell at the time of the winter solstice, when the light seemed to be leaving the world and the days stretched impossibly long. The celebration wasn't simply a distraction from the cold, it was a communal effort to defy the darkness, to push back against the fear and isolation that the endless winter nights might bring. In many ways, it symbolized the community's strength, that together they could endure. The fires lit during Saturnalia weren't just for warmth, they were symbolic beacons of hope, of light fighting to return to the world. Similarly, the Norse Yule festival, which we now recognize as the basis for many Christmas customs, was a crucial part of survival in the Scandinavian winter. For the Norse, the Yule log wasn't just an ornament, it was a vital piece of their winter rituals, a way to bring the community together. The Yule log was ceremonially burned to symbolize the return of the sun, and the warmth it provided kept both the body and the soul alive during the long, dark nights. Every piece of the Yule ritual was grounded in the need for light, both physical and spiritual, to help sustain people through the coldest and darkest time of the year. For these ancient societies, winter was not a season of leisure, but one of purpose. Every celebration was designed to maintain social order, to ensure that people remained connected in a time when the cold could easily isolate them. The rituals gave structure to a season that could easily feel endless, and they offered a sense of continuity and comfort that was deeply necessary. Winter was not a time to escape the challenges of life, it was a time to confront them, together. The feasts, the sacrifices, the rituals, each one was designed to hold the fabric of society together, keeping the communal spirit alive, even when the outside world seemed determined to strip it away. But there was something even deeper at work in these traditions. They were psychological anchors for people, giving them a sense of purpose during a time when everything else, food, light, warmth, was in short supply. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the need to reaffirm human connection became all the more urgent. Winter rituals allowed people to feel that they were part of something larger than themselves, something that transcended the fear and cold of the moment. In a world that seemed bent on isolation, these festivals and traditions created spaces for unity and shared meaning. It begs the question, why did these vital practices eventually fade away? Why did these traditions, so essential for survival in ancient times, become hollow echoes of their former selves? What forces of change swept in and made them seem less important? As we look forward, the answers may lie in the very forces that shaped the modern world. Forces that gradually severed our connection to nature and the cycles of the seasons. And as we move forward, we must ask, is it possible to reignite the spark of those traditions, to find once more the strength they offered? As we examine the vanishing of ancient winter traditions, the first question that arises is, was their disappearance simply a consequence of time, or was something more deliberate at play? It's easy to assume that the fading of these rituals was a natural progression, that as societies evolved, the traditions that once served a vital purpose simply became obsolete. However, the truth is far more complex and far more unsettling. The roots of this disappearance stretch deep into the upheavals of history, particularly during the rise of industrialization. The Industrial Revolution, with its promise of efficiency, progress, and modernity, introduced a new way of life that was sharply disconnected from the rhythms of nature. As people flocked to cities, drawn by the promise of work and a brighter future, they left behind the agrarian lifestyle that had shaped their winters for millennia. Winter, once a time of communal survival and spiritual reflection, became a time for work and productivity in the cities. With the shift from farming communities to industrialized urban centers, the natural cycles of the seasons, including the long winters, lost their significance. In this brave new world, winter was no longer about gathering together to ensure survival or to celebrate the return of light. It was simply another obstacle to productivity. The seasonal rituals that had once provided both comfort and spiritual guidance began to feel irrelevant to a society obsessed with progress, with the practical demands of modern life taking precedence over age-old customs. People no longer needed to huddle around fires to stay warm in the long nights. Instead, they sought the warmth of factories and homes lit by electric lights. The slow rhythms of winter gave way to the relentless pace of industrialization, and with it, the customs that had once bound people together fell away. But it wasn't just industrialization that played a part in the erasure of winter traditions. The rise of modern religions also had a significant influence on how ancient customs were reframed or suppressed altogether. Christianity, in particular, played a critical role in the transformation of winter rituals. Many of the winter traditions we now associate with Christmas, such as the Yule log, feasting, and even the celebration of light, were once part of ancient pagan solstice festivals. But as Christianity spread across Europe and other parts of the world, these pagan traditions were seen as dangerous remnants of false beliefs. In an effort to purify society and align it with Christian doctrine, many of these customs were either outright suppressed or absorbed into Christian rituals, stripped of their original meaning. Take the example of the winter solstice itself. Once a celebration of the sun's return, marking the rebirth of light and life, it became subsumed under the Christian celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ. The solstice, which was observed with various rituals in cultures across the globe, was gradually replaced by Christmas, a festival of birth and hope, but one that also came to represent the consolidation of power within the Church. By rebranding the solstice as a religious holiday and transforming the ancient symbols of rebirth into representations of Christianity, an entire cultural tradition was redefined and in some cases erased. Even the figure of Santa Claus, now associated with Christmas, has its roots in older, pre-Christian traditions. The Norse god Odin, who rode through the skies on a sleigh during the winter, was once a central figure in Yule celebrations. But as Christianity took hold, the old gods faded into obscurity, replaced by a more sanitized version of winter cheer. Over time, the jolly figure of Santa Claus emerged a more palatable, commercialized version of the ancient myths that served the purposes of a society increasingly focused on materialism rather than spiritual reflection. And it wasn't just religious institutions that reshaped winter traditions. Political forces also played a role in the suppression or alteration of these customs. In England, during the English Civil War in the 17th century, the Puritans banned Christmas celebrations outright. To them, the boisterous feasts and revelry associated with Christmas were decadent and unholy, a throwback to pagan practices. Under their rule, Christmas was outlawed, and anyone caught celebrating it faced punishment. This period marked a significant moment in the history of winter traditions, as it represented the active erasure of an entire cultural identity that had once been rooted in celebration and community. Even in the centuries following, the politics of religion and class continued to reshape how winter holidays were observed, stripping them of much of their deeper, spiritual significance. The rise of secularization in the 19th and 20th centuries further hastened the decline of traditional winter rituals. As society became more focused on rationality, science, and progress, the old, mysterious customs, those tied to the cycles of nature, to the sun and moon, seemed increasingly out of place. The winter months, once a time of spiritual and communal significance, became commercialized. The advent of mass consumerism, particularly in the 20th century, redefined winter celebrations not as sacred rites, but as economic events. The rise of shopping malls, Christmas advertisements, and the consumer-driven holiday season left little room for the ancient rituals that had once guided people through the darkness of winter. The glow of electric lights replaced the flickering warmth of candles. Families gathered not to celebrate the sun's return, but to exchange gifts. The forces of industrialization, religion, politics, and commercialization did not just alter winter traditions, they buried them. What had once been essential for survival, both physically and spiritually, was gradually forgotten, overshadowed by the relentless march of modernity. And yet, despite this seeming erasure, remnants of these ancient practices still linger in the corners of our modern celebrations. The Yule log, though now more of a festive decoration than a symbol of the sun's return, still appears on Christmas tables. The Christmas tree, though now a secular symbol, has its origins in pre-Christian tree worship. The winter solstice, once the most significant day of the year, is now relegated to a footnote, yet it still marks a turning point, both in nature and in our hearts. This is where the mystery deepens. Despite their apparent disappearance, these traditions have never truly vanished. They exist today, hidden in plain sight, often disguised as something more palatable to modern sensibilities. The question remains, are we, in some way, unknowingly continuing the very customs that once guided our ancestors through the long winter nights? Have we truly forgotten these ancient practices, or are we merely awaiting the right moment to rediscover them? The mystery of these lost traditions, far from being an ancient riddle, may be one that continues to unravel in our own time. And as we begin to explore the depths of these traditions, we might just find that the darkness of winter holds far more than we've been told. There was a time when the winter solstice wasn't just a passing moment, a date on a calendar. It was the centerpiece of ancient lives. The shortest day and the longest night, that one fleeting instant when darkness seemed to swallow the earth whole, was, in fact, a moment of profound significance. Across cultures, from the icy northern reaches of Europe to the deserts of Egypt, the solstice was recognized not as an end, but as a rebirth, a moment where the very fabric of the universe seemed to renew itself. And what if, despite the vast distances between these ancient civilizations, they were all marking the same celestial event, each in their own mysterious way? What if they all understood that the return of the sun signified more than just the passage of time? It was a cosmic event that spoke to something far deeper. In the Andes, the Incan people celebrated the solstice with the Inti Raymi, or Festival of the Sun, an event that honored the sun god Inti. For the Incas, the solstice wasn't merely a shift in the seasons, it was a celestial affirmation of life itself. They believed the sun, after losing strength during the months of winter, would begin its return on the solstice, bringing warmth and fertility back to the land. This moment marked the beginning of a new cycle, not just for the crops, but for the entire spiritual and physical world. Ceremonies were performed with great reverence, featuring dances, music, and rituals meant to honor the sun and ensure its return. The Incas, like so many other ancient peoples, understood that their very survival, whether in terms of food, warmth, or community, was tied to the sun's cycles. Thousands of miles away, in the lands of the Celts, the winter solstice was no less a time of cosmic reverence. The ancient Celts celebrated the rebirth of the sun with their Yule festival. Like the Incas, they too marked the solstice as a moment of renewal. The Yule log, a central symbol of their winter celebrations, was burned to honor the return of light. The Yule tree, decorated with candles and trinkets, symbolized the life and energy returning to the earth. For the Celts, the solstice wasn't just a physical phenomenon, it was a spiritual moment, a time when the divine energy of the sun was restored. Their rituals were centered around the idea that through this cosmic event, balance was restored to the world, and darkness gave way to the light, not just physically, but spiritually as well. In the far north, the Norse peoples marked the solstice with celebrations of their own. The festival of Yule was not just about the return of the sun, but about survival through the harshest months of the year. The Norse believed that the solstice represented the victory of light over darkness, and their celebrations were rooted in both the physical and metaphysical aspects of this rebirth. The Yule log was burned in great bonfires, symbolizing warmth and the promise of a new cycle. To the Norse, the darkest night of the year was also a time to honor their gods, who were seen as protectors against the forces of chaos and darkness. But it wasn't only the people of the Americas or Europe who recognized the solstice. In Egypt, the ancient Egyptians celebrated the rebirth of the sun through their festival of Khoiak, tied to the resurrection of Osiris, the god of life and death. The Egyptians, like the Incas, believed the solstice represented a cosmic rebirth. Osiris, once dead and entombed, was resurrected with the return of the sun, a parallel to the annual flooding of the Nile, which brought fertility to the land. This was not just a celebration of the sun's return, it was a celebration of life itself, ensuring that nature, agriculture, and life would continue in harmony with the celestial forces. And across ancient cultures, from the Greeks to the Romans, similar festivals echoed these same celestial themes. The Roman festival of Saturnalia, though more associated with social liberation, still marked a time when the light began to return. The shift from darkness to light was seen as a universal force that transcended borders, languages, and empires. It was a cosmic event that affected everyone, whether they were in the lush green hills of Britain or the desert sands of Egypt. What these diverse cultures had in common was not just the acknowledgement of a celestial event, but a shared understanding that this moment, the return of the sun, had deep spiritual and cosmic significance. It was a moment that tied humanity to the universe itself, reminding them of the cycles that governed life. Whether they were lighting bonfires, singing to the gods, or offering sacrifices, these ancient peoples all felt the weight of the moment. It was a time of hope and renewal, a time when light conquered darkness and the promise of a new cycle began. And here lies the mystery. These ancient rituals, these profound celebrations of life, all pointed to the same cosmic truth, yet they were so isolated in time and space. How did these distant cultures, each in their own way, come to the same understanding of the universe? Was it a shared cosmic wisdom passed through generations, or was there something deeper, something beyond our current understanding, that connected them? We may never know for certain, but what is undeniable is that the solstice, once seen as the most sacred moment in the ancient calendar, held meaning that transcended the boundaries of time, space, and civilization. In the next part of this exploration, we will shift our focus to how these ancient traditions of the solstice evolved into the modern winter celebrations we know today. The influence of these ancient rituals can still be seen in many of the customs that now define our winter holidays, despite the many centuries that have passed. In the light of this evolution, the question becomes, how much of the ancient meaning has survived, and how much has been lost in the transition to modernity? As we continue to explore, we may begin to uncover the deeper connections that tie the past to the present, and perhaps we may start to glimpse the mysteries of the winter solstice that still lie hidden within our modern celebrations. As the nights grew longer and colder, a deep and primal fear settled over ancient peoples. Darkness was not merely an absence of light, it was a force of nature, a constant, ever-present reminder of the fragility of life. In the harsh winters of the northern hemisphere, when the sun seemed to abandon the earth, the longest nights stretched on with a chilling finality. It was during this time, when survival was a matter of warmth and light, that ancient cultures began their most sacred of rituals, the act of bringing light into the darkness. And while we may view these traditions as charming festivals today, they were much more than mere celebrations. They were survival mechanisms, spiritual acts aimed at ensuring that the light, both physical and metaphysical, would return. Lighting fires, kindling candles, and creating bonfires were not simply ways to stave off the cold, they were rituals of immense spiritual significance. To our ancestors, fire was a divine force, an element that provided warmth, protection, and a lifeline to survival during the coldest, darkest months of the year. These rituals were imbued with the belief that the very act of bringing light into the darkness could invoke the return of the sun, the return of life itself. The lighting of a fire was not just a practical means of survival, it was a symbolic gesture, a calling to the universe, a plea for the sun to return and bring warmth, food, and hope once again. The psychological power of light in the darkness cannot be overstated. Imagine, for a moment, living in a time when the nights were long and the sun was barely visible, when each day felt like a battle against the encroaching cold and hunger. In such an environment, light was more than just a physical necessity, it was a psychological anchor. The simple flicker of a flame could offer a sense of control over an otherwise uncontrollable world. It was a reminder that even in the darkest hours, there was still hope. Even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the human spirit could fight back, not just through strength, but through belief, through the shared rituals that bound communities together. The act of lighting a fire was both a practical step and a spiritual act, a way of fighting the darkness not just in the world, but in the heart. In ancient Rome, the festival of Saturnalia, which coincided with the winter solstice, was marked by feasts, games, and a reversal of social roles. It was a celebration of light returning to the world, symbolized by the lighting of bonfires and candles. The Romans believed that the solstice marked the turning point, the moment when the sun began its return, and they honored Saturn, the god of time and harvest, as a way of ensuring that the agricultural cycle would begin anew. The bonfires of Saturnalia were more than just festive. They were offerings to Saturn and to the sun itself, a way of invoking the sun's return and securing the future of the harvests. Similarly, the Norse people celebrated Yule, a festival steeped in the symbolic power of light. The Yule log, one of the central symbols of the festival, was not simply a source of warmth, it was a beacon of hope. The log would be lit in a great bonfire, its flames symbolizing the rebirth of the sun and the defeat of the dark, cold forces of winter. The Norse believed that the Yule log carried with it the promise of a new season, a new beginning. The log, often large and heavy, was burned slowly over many days, and as it cracked and sparked, it served as a reminder that even the longest winter would eventually end. In Egypt, the winter solstice held its own deep significance. The ancient Egyptians saw the return of the sun as a cosmic event that reflected their religious beliefs surrounding life, death, and rebirth. Their rituals during the solstice were designed not only to honor the sun god Ra, but also to ensure that the sun would rise again. The burning of incense and the lighting of torches during the solstice were meant to guide Ra's journey through the underworld and ensure that the sun would return to bring life to the earth once again. These rituals were as much about survival as they were about spiritual renewal. By invoking the sun's return through fire, the Egyptians believed they could ensure prosperity, fertility, and growth for the coming year. Across cultures, the symbolism of fire and light during the darkest time of the year speaks to something deep within the human psyche. Light in the darkness represents hope, survival, and the endurance of the human spirit. The primal need for warmth and light is woven into the very fabric of human history, and the rituals surrounding these elements were not just about comfort, they were about survival. Fire was life, and without it, the long winter months could feel like an eternity. The emotional and psychological impact of these rituals was profound. They offered a sense of unity, a shared belief that together, through their collective actions, they could summon the return of the sun. These rituals were not individual acts of devotion but communal efforts, where each person, each family, contributed to the larger goal of bringing light into the world. In this sense, winter rituals were as much about community as they were about survival. They created bonds between people, binding them together in a collective fight against the darkness. The light wasn't just for the individual, it was for everyone. Over time, these ancient practices evolved into more formalized rituals, but the core beliefs remained the same. The need to light the darkness, to invoke the sun's return, never truly faded. It simply transformed. As societies grew more complex and industrialized, the rituals themselves changed. But the essence of what they represented, survival, renewal, and the triumph of light over darkness, remained ingrained in human culture. Today, we still light candles on Christmas trees, decorate our homes with twinkling lights, and celebrate the return of the sun in many ways. While the spiritual and survival aspects of these rituals have been obscured by time, their roots remain in the ancient practices of our ancestors. But how did these primal rituals evolve? What elements of these ancient traditions have survived, and how do they manifest in our modern winter celebrations? In the next section, we will explore how modern winter customs, like Christmas lights and trees, are not just relics of the past, but continuations of these ancient practices. We'll see how the symbolic power of light, the very force that once guided people through the darkness, is still with us today, even if we no longer understand its full significance. The connection between ancient and modern traditions is deeper than we might realize, and in exploring this link, we may find a renewed understanding of the rituals that have guided humanity through the longest, darkest nights. The long, dark nights of winter have always held a certain kind of magic, a deep connection to both the cosmic and the spiritual. For millennia, the winter solstice was a sacred time, marked by rituals that celebrated the return of light. But as the centuries passed, these ancient customs, once so central to human life, began to fade into obscurity. The question arises, was this erasure of solstice traditions simply a result of time, or were these practices deliberately suppressed or transformed? One of the most significant forces behind the disappearance of these ancient solstice celebrations was the rise of organized religion, particularly Christianity. As Christianity spread across Europe, it encountered a rich tapestry of pagan traditions that had long been woven into the fabric of daily life. Pagan rituals celebrating the winter solstice, which had been practiced for centuries, came into direct conflict with the new Christian faith. The early Christian church, eager to establish its dominance, recognized the solstice celebrations as a challenge. Instead of allowing these pagan traditions to continue, the church sought to either suppress or co-opt them. The most notable example of this is the transformation of the winter solstice into Christmas. The birth of Jesus Christ, according to Christian tradition, was celebrated on December 25th, which conveniently coincided with the winter solstice. The church, rather than abolishing the deeply ingrained pagan solstice customs, absorbed them into Christian practices. What had once been a celebration of the sun's return became a celebration of Christ's birth. with the church providing new meaning for the familiar symbols. The Yule log, once a symbol of the sun's rebirth, became associated with the Christian celebration of Christmas. The decorated evergreen tree, originally a symbol of life and the cycle of nature, was repurposed as a Christian symbol of eternal life. This transformation wasn't merely a matter of cultural overlap. It was a deliberate attempt to reframe and control the celebrations. Many of the original solstice rituals were downplayed or erased entirely, their deeper meanings obscured in favor of Christian symbolism. The connection to the natural world, to the rebirth of the sun, and to the cycle of the seasons was increasingly disconnected from the religious practices of the time. In many ways, the solstice and its associated rituals were subordinated to the narrative of Christianity, stripped of their original spiritual significance and remade to fit the framework of a new religious order. But the transformation didn't end with religious conversion. As society evolved further, especially with the rise of the Industrial Revolution, the traditional rhythm of life began to change in ways that further distanced people from the cycles of nature. The agrarian societies that once relied on the solstice to mark critical points in the agricultural calendar began to give way to urbanization. With the growth of cities and the rise of industrial work, people were no longer dependent on the natural cycles that had once shaped their lives. Winter, once a season tied to community bonding, survival, and spiritual reflection, became just another part of the industrial work cycle. The natural rhythms that had guided humanity for centuries were lost in the noise of factories, machines, and the relentless pace of urban life. With this shift came a growing disconnection from the land and the sky. The long winter nights, once seen as an opportunity to reflect and renew, were now simply a break in the working day. The celebrations that had once been rooted in an intimate connection with the seasons, with the very forces of life and death, became more about entertainment and commerce than spiritual renewal. The celebration of Christmas, for example, became increasingly commercialized. What had once been a sacred festival of light's return now revolved around shopping, consumerism, and the exchange of gifts, disconnected from its ancient roots. This wasn't just a matter of changing customs, it was a fundamental shift in how people saw themselves in relation to the universe. The loss of connection to the solstice meant the loss of a cosmic understanding that had once tied humanity to the stars, to the earth, and to the natural cycles of life. With the industrialization of society, the solstice became less about the spiritual and cosmic forces at play, and more about the pursuit of profit. The emphasis shifted from survival and spiritual renewal to consumption and material gain. Yet, despite this overwhelming shift, traces of the old solstice traditions remain. They are tucked away in the corners of our modern celebrations, hidden in plain sight. The Christmas tree, now adorned with lights and tinsel, still holds echoes of its ancient significance. The act of lighting candles during the dark winter months, whether on Christmas trees or in windows, still calls upon the ancient ritual of inviting light into the darkness. Even the idea of gathering together with family and friends during the holiday season can be seen as a continuation of the ancient communal spirit that defined the solstice festivals of old. However, these remnants are often unacknowledged, stripped of their original meanings. Today, many people view the winter holidays as little more than a time for family gatherings and gift-giving, disconnected from the deeper, more esoteric rituals that once defined them. The modern world's embrace of winter holidays, particularly Christmas, has hidden something far older beneath the surface. An ancient plea for survival, a spiritual cry for light, warmth, and rebirth. The question, then, is not simply why these traditions were erased, but how much of them have survived in their hidden forms. How much of the ancient connection to the cosmos, to light and darkness, still lingers in the modern world? Are we, in some way, continuing to honor the same rituals that our ancestors practiced, albeit without understanding their original significance? Perhaps, beneath the layers of commercialism and secularism, the ancient solstice rituals still speak to us in ways we've forgotten to listen to. As we move forward, we will look more closely at these hidden remnants, exploring how modern winter traditions continue to echo the practices of ancient times. What traces of the past remain in our winter celebrations? And what can they teach us about our connection to the natural world, to the cycles of life and death, and to the very forces of the universe that once guided humanity through the darkest months of the year? The answers may not be as lost as we think. The cold winter winds howled through the barren landscapes, and the night stretched on for what seemed like an eternity. For ancient peoples, the arrival of winter was not just a seasonal shift, it was a fight for survival. In the northern latitudes, where the winters were long and unrelenting, fire and shelter became the ultimate lifelines. Without these basic necessities, life itself would not have been possible through the cold, dark months. It is difficult for us, with our modern conveniences, to imagine a time when survival depended on the very elements we now take for granted. But for those living in the harshest winters, fire was far more than a source of heat. It was a multifaceted tool for survival, a beacon in the coldest, darkest nights. Fire was, quite literally, life. It provided warmth, a necessity that kept people alive during the long, freezing nights. But fire was also a tool of defense against predators, against the chilling isolation of winter, and even against the creeping madness of a season that seemed endless. In ancient cultures, fire was often shared, a communal element around which families and villages would gather for warmth and protection. The communal fire was not only a source of heat, but it also served as a psychological anchor during a time when the isolation of winter could take a toll on mental well-being. Consider the Viking longhouses of medieval Scandinavia, where large hearths were the heart of the home. These fires were not merely there for comfort, they were essential to survival. A single hearth could provide enough heat to warm the entire house, and the smoke from the fire would rise through the central smoke hole, allowing the family to live in relative comfort even in the bitter cold. These longhouses were often built close together in small villages, ensuring that the heat from each fire could keep the community warm and protected. But it wasn't just about warmth, fire was also used to cook food, an equally vital need during the winter months when fresh provisions were hard to come by. Cooking over an open flame allowed families to prepare stews, roasts, and preserved meats, making it easier to survive on stored foods through the dark months. In the far north, where daylight could vanish for months, the role of fire in maintaining mental health became increasingly important. During the long winter nights, the isolation of the snow-covered land could be overwhelming. The absence of sunlight, combined with the constant cold, made it easy to feel disconnected, even lost. Fire served as a psychological anchor, a reminder that life continued despite the darkness. Gathering around a fire wasn't just about warmth, it was about maintaining a sense of community and purpose. The flickering flames provided comfort, a light in the physical and emotional darkness. Other ancient cultures, too, understood the multifaceted value of fire. In the Roman world, the winter festival of Saturnalia often involved lighting bonfires, not just to mark the end of the year, but to bring light into the darkest time of the year. Fire was a symbol of hope, of renewal, and a reminder that even in the coldest moments, light would eventually return. The Romans, like the Norse, used fire to keep their homes warm, but they also used it to create a sense of festivity and togetherness. The fires of Saturnalia were a way to defy the darkness and celebrate life, even as winter's chill took hold. Similarly, ancient Celtic people relied heavily on fire to survive winter's grasp. In their homes, hearths were the center of life, and they used fire for warmth, cooking, and ritual. In fact, the symbolic importance of fire in Celtic culture was so great that it played a central role in many of their festivals. The Yule log, for example, was lit during the winter solstice to symbolize the return of the sun. The fire wasn't just a practical tool, it was a spiritual act, invoking the return of light after the longest night. The burning of the Yule log was a way to honor the sun and ensure that its warmth would return, bringing life back to the land. And yet, it wasn't just about the warmth of the body. It was about survival in the fullest sense, including the mental resilience needed to endure the long, isolating winter nights. Communities found ways to share the warmth of their hearths, not just physically, but emotionally too. The fires were a symbol of the unbreakable bonds between people, a reminder that even in the coldest, most isolated months, there was a light to be shared, a shared warmth that held them together. In times when the world could seem overwhelmingly bleak, the glow of the fire offered hope. The isolation of winter in ancient times was a far more acute experience than we may realize today. In the absence of modern technology, with no electric lights or central heating, the long nights were profoundly isolating. And so, the necessity of fire and shelter wasn't just about surviving the cold, It was about surviving the psychological toll of the season. The warmth of a fire, whether shared among a family or a community, provided an emotional lifeline, a shared sense of purpose and belonging that was vital to mental health. But fire wasn't the only solution to surviving winter's grip. Shelter, too, was absolutely critical. In the far north, where temperatures could plummet to unbearable lows, having a well-constructed home made all the difference. The Vikings and their Scandinavian counterparts knew the importance of a sturdy structure. Longhouses, built with thick walls of wood and stone, were designed to trap heat and keep out the bitter winds. The roofs were slanted to prevent the snow from building up, and windows, when they existed, were small to minimize heat loss. These houses weren't just shelters, they were symbols of survival, meticulously crafted to withstand the harshest of conditions. In the Celtic world, homes were built with similar consideration. Roundhouses, made from timber and thatched roofs, were built low to the ground, with small, centrally placed hearths that radiated heat throughout the structure. The fires inside were constant, with families gathered close to the hearth, where warmth and light were shared throughout the long nights. These shelters, combined with fire, ensured that ancient peoples could survive not just physically, but emotionally as well. The structure of the home itself provided safety and comfort, and the fire offered both warmth and light. Together, they created an environment where people could endure the long, isolated winter months, protecting both their bodies and their spirits. The psychology of survival during these harsh months was complex. Both the physical and emotional aspects were intertwined. Surviving a medieval winter without the modern comforts we know today would have required a profound understanding of the environment, the seasons, and the basic necessities for survival. Fire and shelter were not luxuries, they were lifelines. Without them, survival would have been impossible, and so these traditions became deeply embedded in the cultures of the time. They weren't just about comfort, they were about survival in the truest sense. As we continue to explore the ancient techniques for surviving the long winters, we'll look into how these cultures also relied on other essential skills, food preservation, mental resilience, and even social strategies to maintain unity through isolation. The need to prepare for winter wasn't just about surviving one harsh season, it was about ensuring that the community could continue to thrive even when the world outside seemed to shut down. But perhaps the most critical aspect was the enduring human spirit, the strength to hold on to hope, to light a fire, and to build a shelter that would keep the darkness at bay. As the days grew shorter and the biting winds of winter began to howl, ancient societies faced a challenge that would define their survival: how to endure the long months of cold without the luxury of fresh food. In an age where refrigeration was nothing but a dream, people had to rely on a variety of ingenious methods to preserve their food, ensuring that their communities could survive even when the earth was locked in the grip of winter. But these methods weren't just about storing food, they were deeply embedded in the culture, providing a link between the harsh, isolated winter months and the outside world that still existed, just beyond the reach of the frozen landscape. Imagine a time when every meal was precious, every piece of meat a gift from nature that had to be preserved, not just for sustenance, but for survival. In many ways, preserving food during winter was a spiritual act, a way of holding on to life during the months when nature seemed to offer nothing but darkness and death. The tools and techniques these ancient peoples developed were as varied as the lands they inhabited, but they all shared the same underlying principle: to preserve life, to ensure the community could thrive, even when the sun was low in the sky and the world outside was frozen and barren. Salting was one of the oldest and most effective preservation techniques used by ancient cultures. Salt, as simple as it sounds, was a powerful tool. For centuries, it was used not only to enhance flavor but also to draw moisture out of food, preventing the growth of harmful bacteria and fungi. Meat was salted in large quantities, especially by societies in the colder northern regions, where livestock could be slaughtered in the autumn and preserved for the long winter. Salting was also used to preserve fish, a staple in many coastal cultures. The Vikings, for example, would salt their catches, storing them in barrels to be eaten throughout the winter. The process was simple but effective, and it allowed people to store enough food to last through the dark months when fresh supplies were hard to come by. Smoking, another critical preservation method, played a similar role in helping ancient peoples endure the winter. Smoke, in addition to flavoring the food, created a protective barrier around the meat which kept insects and bacteria at bay. The smoke also added an essential layer of preservation, drying the food while infusing it with the aromatic flavors that would carry people through months of cold. The Norse, for example, would use smokehouses to dry fish and meats, allowing them to store enough provisions for months at a time. In cultures where hunting was a primary means of obtaining food, smoking was not just a way of preserving meat, it was an essential survival strategy, ensuring that there was always food to be had, even when hunting expeditions were fewer during the winter months. Drying, often used in combination with salting or smoking, was another essential method of preserving food. The dry, cold winter air made this technique particularly effective in areas with crisp, dry winters, such as in the steppes of Mongolia and the northern parts of Europe. Fruits, vegetables, and even herbs were dried in the open air, using sunlight or the cold winter winds to remove moisture. This not only extended the shelf life of foods but also concentrated their flavors. Dried fruits, like apples and berries, could be stored for months, adding valuable nutrients to the diet when fresh produce was unavailable. The dried foods, often stored in cool, dark places like cellars or smokehouses, could be rehydrated or eaten as is, providing an important source of sustenance when fresh food was scarce. Fermentation, though less widely known today, was another key preservation technique that kept ancient communities fed through the long winter. While fermentation is most commonly associated with drinks like wine or beer, it was just as vital for preserving vegetables and fruits. Sauerkraut, kimchi, and other fermented vegetables were a staple of many cultures, particularly in areas where vegetables were grown in abundance during the short growing season. The process of fermentation not only preserved the food, but also enriched it with beneficial bacteria, offering essential nutrients and even probiotics to help boost the immune system during the cold months. In Scandinavian countries, for example, fermented fish, like surströmming, became an important dietary component, while in Eastern Europe, pickled cabbage and other vegetables provided much-needed vitamins when fresh produce was unavailable. These preservation techniques did more than just keep food from spoiling. They served as a link between the harsh, isolated winter months and the vitality of the outside world. As the frozen landscape shut down around them, people were able to bring the outside world into their homes in the form of dried meats, salted fish, and fermented vegetables. These techniques allowed ancient cultures to maintain a semblance of normalcy, giving them the ability to feed their families and communities through the most difficult months of the year. They transformed the very act of survival into an art form, ensuring that food was not just a means to survive, but a way to preserve the spirit and the vitality of life itself. In more temperate regions, cultures would turn to root cellars to store their bounty. These cool underground chambers allowed for the preservation of fresh vegetables, like potatoes, carrots, and turnips, which could be kept through the cold months without spoiling. These root cellars were essential for farming communities that relied on their harvest to feed their families and livestock through the winter. They were a vital part of agricultural survival, offering both a practical solution to storing food and a psychological comfort, as they represented the fruits of a season's labor kept safe from the ravages of winter. Across cultures, these methods were refined and passed down through generations. From the icy lands of Scandinavia to the sun-soaked Mediterranean, ancient peoples had perfected the art of preserving food, using techniques that would ensure survival not just for themselves, but for entire communities. In these practices, food preservation was a communal act. Neighbors shared their knowledge, their techniques, and their provisions, knowing that their survival depended on working together. These methods, though born out of necessity, also created a deep sense of connection between people and their environment. They understood that survival was not just about feeding the body. It was about preserving the very essence of life, ensuring that both people and culture could endure the cold and dark months until the warmth of spring returned. As we continue our exploration of survival through the long, cold winter months, we'll begin to examine the psychological and social strategies that ancient communities used to endure the isolation of winter. While food preservation ensured physical survival, it was the bonds between people, the shared rituals, and the mental resilience cultivated through the winter that allowed societies to thrive. These communal efforts were just as essential to survival as the food that was stored, and they helped keep the human spirit alive during the darkest of times. The fight for survival wasn't just against the elements, it was also a battle against isolation, despair, and the emotional toll of winter's long nights. As the cold grip of winter tightened around ancient communities, survival was never solely an individual endeavor. In fact, it was the strength of the community itself, its social bonds and collective efforts that allowed people to endure the harshest months of the year. Winter, with its isolation and extended darkness, could have easily driven people to despair, but ancient societies understood something fundamental. Together, they could weather the storm. Communities were built around shared survival, where every task, from preparing food to maintaining shelter, was organized with one goal in mind: endurance. Imagine, for a moment, the isolation of a small farming village during winter. The world outside is barren, covered in snow, and daylight is fleeting, leaving the village trapped in a seemingly endless stretch of darkness. The natural world has retreated, and the struggle to stay alive becomes even more pronounced. In such a setting, individuals would have found it incredibly difficult, perhaps even impossible, to survive on their own. And yet, across ancient cultures, people found ways to organize their lives around the communal effort, relying on social structures to keep morale high and bodies warm. One of the most important social mechanisms for winter survival was the division of labor. As the days grew shorter and colder, families and entire communities would come together to ensure that everyone had enough food, warmth, and shelter. There were communal tasks, such as gathering firewood, preserving food, and repairing homes, that required everyone's involvement. These tasks were not merely practical, they were symbolic of the community's unity and shared commitment to survival. For example, in many cultures, the act of storing food for winter was a communal endeavor. People would gather together to process and preserve meats, vegetables, and grains, knowing that this collective effort would guarantee that no one went hungry when the world outside was covered in ice and snow. In addition to the practical tasks, communal social structures were essential in maintaining morale. Winter was not just a physical challenge, it was a psychological one too. The long nights could easily lead to feelings of isolation, loneliness, and despair. This was especially true in more isolated regions, where entire villages might be cut off from the rest of the world by snowstorms or frozen roads. In these dark months, it was social interaction, shared laughter, and mutual support that kept the darkness from creeping too far into the hearts of the people. To combat the psychological toll of winter, communities created social rituals that strengthened their bonds and ensured that no one was left to endure the cold alone. These rituals were as varied as the cultures that practiced them, but they all shared the same purpose: to keep the community connected and supported, even in the most trying of times. In many places, communal meals played a significant role. These meals weren't just about feeding the body, they were about feeding the soul. A shared feast, prepared with care and eaten together, was an act of solidarity, a reminder that everyone was in this struggle together. Whether it was a harvest feast or a ritual meal to mark the solstice, these gatherings helped maintain the bonds that were vital to survival. For the Norse, winter was marked by the Yule festival, a time when the community would gather together to celebrate the return of the sun. The Yule feast was a central part of this festival, where families would come together to share food, drink, and stories. The communal aspect of the Yule festival helped to reinforce the social structure of the Norse community, with the feast acting as both a ritual and a celebration of survival. The Yule log, which would burn for days, symbolized the endurance of the community through the long winter, and the act of sharing the fire around the hearth was a powerful symbol of unity and hope. In the Celtic world, winter was also marked by communal rituals. The Celts believed that the long nights of winter were a time when the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest, and they used this time for spiritual reflection and community rituals. The festival of Samhain, which took place at the end of October and marked the beginning of winter, was a time when people gathered to honor their ancestors and seek protection from the cold and dark. These gatherings were as much about ensuring survival as they were about honoring the dead and maintaining a connection to the past. During these rituals, the act of storytelling played a crucial role, with elders passing down wisdom and tales of survival to younger generations. Through these stories, the community could keep the warmth of the past alive, drawing strength from the knowledge and experience of those who had endured winter before them. Storytelling was not just a form of entertainment, it was a crucial part of the social fabric. In many cultures, winter was the time when oral traditions thrived, as families huddled together around the fire and shared tales of heroes, gods, and the triumph of light over darkness. These stories were more than just myths, they were lessons, reminders of what it took to survive the harshest of seasons. The stories reinforced the social order, reminding people of their roles within the community and the importance of cooperation. They also provided a sense of continuity, ensuring that the traditions of survival were passed down from one generation to the next. Religious and spiritual practices also played a vital role in helping communities endure the darkness of winter. Many winter solstice traditions were deeply tied to the belief that the return of the sun would bring new life, not just to the earth but to the community as a whole. The rituals surrounding the solstice, from prayers to the lighting of candles, were symbolic acts of hope, a collective plea for the sun to return and restore balance to the world. These rituals provided a sense of security, reminding people that the cycles of nature were predictable, that winter would eventually end, and the warmth and light would return. The role of these communal gatherings and rituals in ensuring survival was not just physical, it was emotional and psychological as well. In a time when the world outside was often a harsh and unforgiving place, the community provided a sense of security and belonging. The isolation of winter, while physically challenging, became a time to strengthen the bonds that held families and villages together. The rituals and traditions of these long winter months were designed to reinforce that no one was truly alone, and that together, the community could face the darkness and emerge into the light. As we continue to explore the strategies that ancient cultures used to survive the long winter months, we'll see how these communal practices were not just about survival, they were also about maintaining the collective spirit, ensuring that the social bonds which held communities together could endure even the harshest seasons. But these practices, while vital for survival, also carried with them a deeper, mystical significance. In the next chapter, we will explore how winter rituals, once rooted in survival, began to take on more spiritual and cosmic dimensions, transforming the way people saw the world and their place in it. These winter customs were not merely about weathering the storm, they were about understanding the very cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The winter months are often seen as a test of physical endurance. How long can we withstand the biting cold, the snow, and the isolation? But what if these long, dark winters weren't just a physical challenge? What if they were, in many ways, a test of the human mind? In the harshest conditions, when the sun barely touched the earth and the days felt endless, the mental and emotional toll of winter was just as severe as the cold itself. Ancient societies, long before modern science recognized the concept of seasonal affective disorder, SAD, had to find ways to cope with the psychological strain that came with being confined indoors for months, facing long nights with little respite. In northern latitudes, where winter could stretch for months, the sun's absence was more than just a physical absence. It was a psychic void. The lack of daylight was not just a minor inconvenience, it was a profound disruption to the rhythms of life. Without sunlight, human beings lose a vital source of energy, both physical and emotional. The human body, still connected to the cycles of nature, felt the impact of darkness in ways that went beyond the simple absence of light. The psychological toll of extended winter nights could lead to feelings of sadness, disconnection, and a general loss of purpose. And in the absence of modern knowledge or treatments, ancient peoples had to navigate this profound isolation with their own resources. The most apparent effect of prolonged darkness is the impact on mood. Today, we understand that a lack of sunlight can alter brain chemistry, affecting levels of serotonin and melatonin, hormones responsible for regulating mood and sleep. In ancient societies, this could have manifested as irritability, fatigue, and depression. But even more than just the physical consequences, the emotional toll of winter was felt in the soul. The long nights carried a psychological weight, a sense of loneliness and helplessness as communities were cut off from each other by the snow and the cold. People could feel disconnected from the world, as though the sun itself had abandoned them. In the absence of modern lighting and heating, it was easy for homes to feel like isolated prisons, where the bleak weather outside amplified the sense of mental confinement. The psychological strain wasn't just individual, it could affect entire communities. As the cold set in, families and villages were bound together by the necessity of survival. But even in close-knit communities, the isolation could feel suffocating. Days without sunlight, combined with the constant threat of food scarcity and the harshness of the weather, led to anxiety and a sense of powerlessness. This was especially true in cultures where the winter months meant not just physical survival, but the continued survival of traditions, of culture, and of life itself. Without the mental fortitude to withstand the darkness, the very fabric of society could have unraveled. So, how did ancient peoples cope with the mental and emotional toll of winter? How did they manage to maintain morale during these long, isolated months? One of the most powerful tools for combating the psychological strain of winter was the creation of rituals and communal gatherings. These practices not only provided warmth and light, but they also served as vital psychological anchors. Communities came together to hold festivals, tell stories, and share food, knowing that these activities helped keep despair at bay. These rituals were not just for entertainment, they were an essential part of maintaining mental health during the winter. In the Norse world, the Yule festival wasn't just a celebration of the return of the sun, it was a celebration of survival itself. During the darkest time of the year, the Norse people would gather around large bonfires, singing, feasting, and telling stories. The very act of gathering together, of sharing warmth and light, was a powerful antidote to the isolation and psychological strain of the winter. Similarly, the Celtic people celebrated the festival of Samhain, which marked the beginning of winter, with communal feasts and rituals designed to honor the spirits and ensure the community's survival through the cold months. These rituals weren't just social, they were deeply spiritual, reaffirming the interconnectedness of all life and offering a sense of continuity during the long, dark nights. Even when it wasn't a time for formal festivals, winter was a time for storytelling. In many cultures, the long nights became the perfect opportunity for families and communities to gather around the fire and share stories. These weren't just tales for entertainment, they were essential for preserving cultural knowledge, teaching survival skills, and maintaining the emotional health of the group. The stories passed down from generation to generation helped to reinforce the bonds between people, creating a sense of belonging that was vital for mental survival. The very act of storytelling was an affirmation that life would go on, that the dark, endless nights would eventually give way to the light. Rituals and communal practices weren't just psychological band-aids, they were ways to reaffirm the connection to the world outside, even when the world seemed distant and unreachable. In some cultures, these winter gatherings were also deeply tied to religious practices. The return of the sun during the solstice wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was seen as a spiritual event that needed to be marked. People gathered together in reverence for the sun's return, offering prayers, sacrifices, and rituals designed to ensure the sun would continue its cycle. These practices gave the community a sense of agency, of control over something much larger than themselves. In a world where survival often depended on forces beyond their control, whether it was the weather, the harvest, or the hunt, these rituals offered a small but meaningful way to assert power over the elements. Despite the dark and often bleak conditions, ancient cultures understood that survival wasn't just about enduring the physical challenges of winter, it was about maintaining mental strength and community bonds. The psychological toll of winter could be as destructive as the cold itself, but by coming together, sharing stories, and performing rituals, communities were able to fight off despair and isolation. This raises the question, how did these cultures manage to not only survive the physical hardships of winter, but also maintain the mental resilience necessary to thrive in the darkest months? The answer lies not just in their practical survival skills, but in their deeply ingrained social structures, communities bound together by rituals, stories, and shared purpose. As we move into the next section, we will look at how these social dynamics were essential not just for survival, but for ensuring that people stayed connected, emotionally and spiritually, through the most challenging months of the year. The survival of winter wasn't just about fighting the elements, it was about fighting the darkness inside. What if the winter festivals you thought were just about fun and festivities were actually survival mechanisms? What if the bright lights, the feasts, and the music were more than simply celebrations, but tools designed to keep despair at bay, to maintain emotional stability during the coldest, darkest months of the year. In the deepest chill of winter, when the sun's warmth seemed like a distant memory, communal celebrations were not mere distractions, they were lifelines. They were the social glue that bound communities together, offering a vital respite from the harsh conditions of the season and providing emotional and psychological support when isolation could easily fracture spirits. For ancient societies, winter festivals were essential to survival, not just physically but emotionally. They were the antidote to the long, silent nights that threatened to sap the will to endure. The psychological toll of winter was profound, and it was through these communal gatherings that people found the strength to continue, not only enduring the cold but thriving in the face of it. These festivals weren't merely about the passing of time or keeping up traditions. They were carefully constructed rituals designed to ensure that no one faced the winter alone. And in their power to unite and uplift, these festivals were as much about survival as they were about celebration. Take the Norse Yule Festival, for example, a celebration that still echoes in our modern-day Christmas customs. For the Norse, Yule marked the rebirth of the sun, a time when darkness gave way to light. But the Yule Festival wasn't just about honouring the celestial event, it was about surviving the darkness. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year, was a moment when communities came together in the warmth of shared fires, storytelling, and feasting. The Yule log, a central symbol of the festival, wasn't just a decorative piece of wood, it was a sacred part of the ritual, an offering to the gods, and a way of invoking the return of the sun. As the fire burned bright, so did the hope for brighter days ahead. The act of lighting the Yule log and keeping the fire alive for several days wasn't just a matter of comfort. It was a psychological tool, a way to keep spirits high during a time when the world outside seemed to hold only cold, darkness, and uncertainty. The communal feasts, held during these winter festivals, were just as important for emotional survival. In ancient times, food was never just sustenance, it was a symbol of life, a communal bond. During the winter months, when fresh food was scarce and the threat of famine loomed large, a shared meal became an act of defiance against the harshness of winter. It was a symbol of abundance, a temporary return to the richness of life, despite the season's challenges. People gathered together to share whatever they had, whether it was salted meats, dried fruits, or fermented grains. In doing so, they reinforced the idea that they were not alone, that even in the bleakest of times, the community stood together. The storytelling that accompanied these feasts was another vital aspect of winter survival. The long, dark nights were a perfect backdrop for the exchange of stories, tales of gods, heroes, and ancestors who had triumphed over darkness. Tales that reminded people of their resilience and the strength of their shared history. These stories were more than entertainment, they were vital to maintaining morale. They connected generations, linked the present to the past, and offered hope for the future. They reminded people that even in the face of the most overwhelming darkness, the light would return. Storytelling was also a way of passing down survival knowledge, stories that carried with them wisdom about the harsh winter conditions, survival techniques, and social bonds. The act of sharing these stories created a sense of continuity and purpose, a recognition that the community was part of something larger than itself. In other parts of the world, similar festivals and rituals served to strengthen communities and maintain morale during the winter months. In ancient China, the midwinter feast, which later evolved into the celebration of the Chinese New Year, was a time for family reunions, feasting, and honoring ancestors. The winter solstice was a time of renewal, a time when families would gather together to share food, celebrate their bonds, and offer sacrifices to ensure a bountiful year ahead. Much like in the Norse traditions, the Chinese solstice celebrations were not just about the passage of time, they were about securing the community's future. The act of coming together to honor the cycles of nature was both a spiritual and emotional anchor in a time of year when everything else seemed still and frozen. In the Celtic world, the winter festival of Samhain marked the beginning of winter and the transition from the harvest season to the cold months. The Celts, like the Norse, understood the importance of rituals that connected the community to the natural world. Samhain was a time for honoring the dead and seeking protection for the coming winter, but it was also a time for gathering together, for feasting, and for marking the passage of time with joy and community. These festivals were often accompanied by dances, songs, and the telling of stories that had deep spiritual meaning, reinforcing both the cultural and emotional unity of the people. These winter festivals served as critical emotional lifelines. They were times when the harshness of winter's isolation was alleviated through the warmth of fire, food, and companionship. In societies that were often fragile, reliant on the cycles of nature and the shared efforts of the community, these festivals were acts of psychological resistance. They reinforced the sense that, even in the darkest of times, there was light to be found in the firelight, in the food shared, in the voices raised in song, and in the stories passed down. These moments of gathering helped preserve not just physical life, but the very spirit of the community, offering respite from the strain of isolation, anxiety, and despair that the long winter months brought with them. But these festivals were more than just emotional lifelines. They were also vital to reinforcing social structures and hierarchies. The way people celebrated winter, who was invited to join in the feasts, who led the ceremonies, and who performed the rituals, all had significant social meaning. Winter festivals were times when the social order was both reinforced and subtly challenged. They were a moment when people came together across social divisions, rich and poor, masters and servants, participating in a shared ritual that transcended individual status. Yet, within these communal events, the rituals also served to reinforce the roles of leaders and elders. The sharing of stories, the performance of rituals, and the leadership of feasts all underscored the social structures that governed everyday life, even as they provided emotional release. But not all winter gatherings were purely joyful. Some were tinged with darker, more mysterious undertones. While these communal celebrations were vital for survival, they were also intertwined with spiritual beliefs that acknowledged the thin boundary between life and death during the coldest months of the year. As we delve deeper into these practices, we will explore how the long nights of winter gave rise to darker rituals, those that called upon the forces of life, death, and rebirth, and which held profound spiritual significance for ancient peoples. The shift from celebration to solemn ritual, from the warmth of shared fires to the chilling reminder of mortality, was an integral part of the human experience of winter. The mysteries of the season were not only embraced through joy and festivity, but through the acknowledgement of its darker, more spiritual dimensions. In the next section, we will uncover how these darker rituals began to take on a central role in the cultural and spiritual practices of ancient societies, illuminating the profound relationship between light and darkness, survival and sacrifice, that shaped winter traditions across the world. As winter's darkest days pressed upon ancient societies, the long, silent nights held not just the promise of renewal, but the shadow of fear. While the communal festivals and shared warmth of the season helped to preserve morale and strengthen social bonds, there was another side to winter traditions, one far more mysterious and often concealed in secrecy. Beneath the surface of the feasts, the dances, and the rituals celebrating light's return, there existed a darker, more ominous side to these traditions. Rituals that dealt with death, rebirth, and the balance between light and darkness. These practices weren't merely about survival, they were about ensuring that the community could exist in harmony with the forces beyond their control, forces that were magnified during the coldest, most isolating time of the year. The long nights of winter, with their oppressive darkness, were seen by many cultures as a time when the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest. It was a period when the boundaries of life and death blurred, and the realm of spirits was believed to be closer to the material world. As such, it became a time for more intense and mysterious rituals. Rituals that were not just about surviving the winter, but about protecting the community from the forces that could threaten their very existence. The winter solstice, with its deep cosmic significance, was often the focal point for these more secretive and sometimes frightening rituals. As the longest night of the year, the solstice marked a time when darkness seemed to have its grip on the world, but also when the sun's rebirth was imminent. This duality, darkness and light, death and rebirth, was central to the spiritual and ritualistic practices of many cultures. And for some societies, it was not just the return of light that was important, but the protection from the darker forces that were believed to roam more freely during these long nights. Take, for example, the ancient Norse people. In their tradition, the Yule festival was a time of celebration, but also one of spiritual protection. The Yule log, while symbolizing the return of the sun, was also a ritualistic offering, The ashes of the Yule log were often kept and scattered around the home for protection against evil spirits and to ensure the health of the household. This practice was not merely symbolic. It was believed that the very act of burning the Yule log could banish harmful spirits and negative energies from the home, guarding it during the dark months of winter. The lighting of the Yule log was thus a spiritual act, aimed at defeating darkness in both the physical and metaphysical sense. Similarly, in Celtic traditions, the winter solstice marked not just the return of light, but the triumph over the forces of death. The Celts believed that during this time, the world of the living and the world of the dead were closest, and so the spirits of ancestors were believed to walk the earth more freely. Samhain, a festival that took place at the end of October and bled into the winter months, was a time when families honoured their ancestors and appeased spirits that might otherwise bring harm. Bonfires were lit not just for warmth, but as offerings to the spirits, inviting protection for the community in the months ahead. During Samhain, it was also believed that the veil between the worlds was thin enough for divination to take place. People would perform rituals meant to communicate with spirits, ask for guidance, or ward off bad omens. This period, rich in ritual, was about more than surviving the cold. It was about ensuring that the darker forces of winter would not overpower the community. In ancient Rome, the festival of Saturnalia marked the solstice, but it was also a time of great reversal and spiritual significance. While Saturnalia was known for its festive, hedonistic celebrations, there were also deeper, more mysterious rituals that took place during this time. Saturn, the god of time and harvest, was also associated with both creation and destruction. The ancient Romans believed that by honouring Saturn during this darkest time of year, they could ensure protection from both famine and evil forces. It was during Saturnalia that some of the most intense and mysterious rites of purification were performed, including sacrifices meant to appease the gods and protect the community from harm. These acts, often involving ritual sacrifice, were carried out with the belief that such offerings could cleanse the community of negative energies and prepare them for the renewal of life that the sun's return promised. Across cultures, the idea of appeasing or protecting oneself from malevolent spirits during the long, dark months of winter was a recurring theme. Many believed that the spirits of the dead roamed freely during the winter solstice, and it was during these times that rituals and sacrifices were seen as necessary to keep these spirits from causing harm. While the specifics of the rituals varied, they all shared the common belief that the winter months were a time of heightened vulnerability to supernatural forces, and therefore demanded greater attention and spiritual preparation. In addition to offerings to appease spirits, some cultures also believed in rituals that involved invoking the power of darkness itself. In Slavic folklore, for example, the winter months were dominated by a figure known as Moroz, the personification of winter and frost. To prevent Moros from wreaking havoc, people would leave offerings at the doorsteps of their homes and perform dances and rituals to ensure that Moros would pass by without causing harm. In this way, the community acknowledged the power of darkness and winter, but also sought to protect themselves from its full force. The darker side of winter rituals wasn't just about warding off malevolent forces, it was also about the acceptance of death and the natural cycles of the world. The winter solstice, a time when the earth seemed to retreat into darkness, symbolized the death of the year. Yet, this death was not seen as final, but as part of a cyclical process. Just as the sun died and was reborn, so too did life and death exist in a delicate balance. Ancient cultures understood that survival depended not only on material resources like food and shelter, but on an acceptance of the rhythms of nature. Death was part of the cycle of life, and winter's darkness was a necessary prelude to spring's light. These darker, more secretive rituals reflect the belief that in order to survive, one must embrace both light and darkness. The rituals that honored death, spirits, and the unseen forces of the winter months weren't about evading the darkness. They were about understanding it, integrating it into life, and learning to survive in harmony with it. In this way, the rituals of winter were more than survival. They were a way of understanding the forces that shape the world and finding a way to live within them. As we move forward in this exploration, we will turn our focus to how these darker winter rituals evolved into the myths and legends that have survived through the ages. These stories, born from the mysterious practices of winter, still influence our culture today, blurring the line between history and folklore. In the next chapter, we will uncover the deep, cosmic symbolism behind the myths that arose from these ancient winter traditions, revealing how they continue to shape our understanding of life, death, and rebirth. What if the myths surrounding winter, the gods of darkness and rebirth, are more than just stories? What if they hold the key to understanding ancient fears and hopes about the long winter nights, offering a glimpse into the collective psyche of our ancestors? Across cultures and time periods, the winter solstice has been a pivotal moment embodying both the oppressive darkness and the promise of renewal. It is no surprise, then, that the myths surrounding this time of year often center around gods and deities who symbolize death, rebirth, and the return of light. These figures, who emerge from the darkness of winter and herald the coming light, are more than just characters in ancient tales. They are reflections of our deepest fears, hopes, and the eternal struggle between light and dark. In ancient Norse mythology, the winter solstice was marked by the death and rebirth of Balder, the beloved sun god. Balder's death, brought about by treachery and darkness, signified not just the end of a cycle but the promise of a new beginning. His death, however, was not final, just as the darkness of winter was not eternal. Balder's death was followed by his resurrection, signaling the return of the sun and the eventual triumph of light over darkness. This myth, one of the central stories in Norse mythology, encapsulates the very essence of the winter solstice. It is a time when the sun seems to die, retreating into the farthest corners of the earth, only to be reborn as the days lengthen and the light gradually returns. In this myth, the death of the sun god is not an end, but a necessary part of the cosmic cycle, symbolizing both the trials of winter and the hope of spring. Similarly, the ancient Greeks had their own solar deity, Helios, whose journey across the sky personified the sun's passage through the year. Helios, like Balder, represented the light that is present even when it seems to fade. His daily ride across the sky brought light to the world, but during the winter solstice, the darkness was at its peak. The gods of Greek mythology, in their own ways, acknowledged the death of the sun and its eventual return, drawing parallels between the natural cycles of the sun's movement and the cycles of life, death, and rebirth that governed the human experience. Helios, though associated with the sun, was also linked to the cycles of life and death, reinforcing the idea that the winter solstice was a time not just of physical darkness, but of spiritual renewal. In many ways, the solstice myths of Balder and Helios can be seen as a universal theme, the story of the sun's death and resurrection, and the hope it inspires. But these themes didn't end with the ancient gods. They carried through into religious traditions that are still deeply ingrained in modern culture. One of the most significant transformations of this winter mythology is found in the Christian nativity story. While the figure of Christ is, of course, central to Christianity, the timing of his birth on or around the winter solstice invokes the same mythological themes of darkness and rebirth that we find in Balder, Helios, and countless other deities from different cultures. In the Christian tradition, the birth of Christ at the winter solstice symbolized the arrival of the light of the world, bringing hope and salvation to humanity in the darkest of times. The nativity story, much like the stories of the Norse and Greek deities, centers around the idea that the darkness of the winter night is temporary, and the coming of light, whether through the sun or a divine figure, marks the beginning of a new era. Christ, born in the darkest moment of the year, signifies the promise of renewal, both spiritually and physically. The imagery of Christ as the light coming into the world echoes the same themes that were present in ancient solstice myths: the triumph of light over darkness, the promise of new beginnings, and the cyclical nature of life. While the details of these myths differ across cultures, the central themes remain strikingly similar. From Balder's death and resurrection to the birth of Helios and the nativity story, each myth reflects a deep, universal understanding of the power of darkness and the need for light. These stories acknowledge the struggle and fear that comes with the darkest days of the year, but they also offer a message of hope. Winter, with its cold nights and isolation, may bring death, but it also brings rebirth. The sun will return, the days will lengthen, the promise of light, both literally and metaphorically, will return. These themes are not just relics of the past, they continue to resonate in our modern winter traditions. The stories of ancient gods, and the rebirth of the sun are woven into the very fabric of how we celebrate the winter season today. Christmas, for example, is a modern celebration of the return of light. The lighting of candles, the bright decorations, and the symbolism of Christ's birth are all reflections of ancient solstice myths. Even the practice of gathering together with family during the darkest months echoes the communal celebrations that ancient cultures held to maintain morale and connection during the long nights. However, while many of these ancient myths have been absorbed into modern religious and secular traditions, some of their darker elements have been obscured or forgotten. The rituals associated with the winter solstice, from sacrifices to divination, have become less visible in our contemporary celebrations. Yet, the core of these myths, the battle between light and darkness, the promise of rebirth, and the collective hope for survival, remains a central part of the winter experience. As we move forward in this exploration of winter myths and legends, it is important to understand that these stories, no matter how they are told or reshaped through time, are more than just tales. They are reflections of the deep psychological and spiritual truths that have guided humanity through the darkest times. These stories remind us that the cycles of nature, life, and death are not just physical realities, they are psychological and emotional forces that shape the way we understand our existence. In the next section, we will take a closer look at how these ancient solstice myths gave rise to enduring cultural practices and legends that have influenced not only modern winter traditions, but also the ways we view the passage of time, life, and death. These myths continue to shape how we think about rebirth and the triumph of light over darkness, guiding us through the cycles of our own lives. The legends of the solstice are more than just stories. They are a deep part of the human experience, connecting us across cultures and generations, teaching us how to navigate the long, dark winters of our own lives. Could the modern Christmas traditions we know today be secretly rooted in ancient, forgotten customs? What's the true story behind Santa Claus and the Yule log? If we look closely at how winter celebrations have evolved over the centuries, we can trace their roots back to ancient myths that predate our modern understanding of these holidays. What we celebrate today as secular or religious traditions, Christmas, New Year's Eve, and even elements of our winter festivities are steeped in symbolism and references to ancient deities, practices, and stories. From the jolly figure of Santa Claus to the ever-present Yule log, many of the familiar elements of our winter holidays have been adapted from myths that were once central to survival, hope, and the battle between darkness and light. One of the most striking examples of ancient winter myths surviving in modern traditions is the figure of Santa Claus. While Santa's cheerful persona and gift-giving role have become iconic symbols of Christmas, the origins of this figure stretch back to the Norse god Odin. In ancient Norse mythology, Odin was a god associated with wisdom, magic, and war, but he also had a role in the winter festivals that celebrated the return of the sun. During the Yule festival, children would hang stockings or boots by the hearth in hopes that Odin would leave them gifts, a tradition rooted in the idea of winter gifts and blessings from divine figures. Over time, this Norse figure evolved into a more familiar character, combining aspects of the historical Saint Nicholas, a 4th century bishop known for his generosity, and the jolly, rotund Santa Claus that we recognize today. Yet, beneath the modern trappings of Santa Claus, the sleigh, the reindeer, the North Pole remains the core symbolism of a winter gift-bringer, a deity who rewards the faithful during the darkest time of the year. The shift from a god like Odin to the modern Santa Claus is a fascinating example of how ancient mythologies subtly transformed over time, influenced by religious changes and evolving social structures, yet preserving the core function of bringing light, joy, and hope during the cold, dark months. The Yule log is another example of an ancient mythological symbol woven into modern winter traditions. In Norse culture, the Yule log was a key component of the winter solstice celebrations. The log, often an oak tree, was burned in great bonfires as a symbol of the sun's return. The act of lighting the Yule log was both a literal and symbolic way to bring light into the darkest time of the year, a ritual to encourage the sun's rebirth. Ashes from the Yule log were often kept and scattered around the home for protection against evil spirits and to ensure a successful year ahead. In modern times, the Yule log, has been distilled into a more festive, familial tradition. The Christmas log, or bouchée de Noël, a dessert shaped like a log, has become a centerpiece of holiday feasts in many countries. While the symbolic significance of the Yule log has faded, the spirit of warmth and light that it represents remains embedded in Christmas celebrations. The tradition of burning a Yule log or gathering around a hearth during winter remains a powerful metaphor for the return of light, even if its more ancient associations with cosmic rebirth have softened over time. The celebration of the winter solstice itself also lingers in modern-day traditions, especially around New Year's Eve. The transition from the old year to the new was once seen as a critical time for spiritual renewal, as people believed that the cycles of time could be influenced by ritual acts. Ancient societies saw the winter solstice as a moment when the sun died and was reborn, signaling the shift from darkness to light. This idea of rebirth at the solstice carried through to later traditions, such as the Roman celebration of Saturnalia, which marked the end of the old year and the hope for renewal. This festival influenced many of the customs we associate with the modern New Year, including feasting, revelry, and the exchange of gifts. Today, New Year's Eve celebrations may seem secular, but they still carry the echoes of those ancient solstice rituals, a time of hope, renewal, and the promise of light returning to the world. In many cultures, the themes of death and rebirth that dominated the solstice myths also persisted in the rituals surrounding New Year's celebrations. The ancient belief that the solstice marked the return of light and life is mirrored in the tradition of making New Year's resolutions, an attempt to start anew, to cleanse oneself from the old year's darkness, and to embrace the possibilities of the year ahead. Just as ancient cultures used the return of the sun as a symbol of personal and communal rebirth, so too do we mark the passage of time with the idea of self-improvement and new beginnings. The very act of gathering together with loved ones during winter celebrations can be traced back to these ancient practices. Communities would come together during the dark months, not only for warmth and sustenance, but for spiritual reasons, to reinforce social bonds and maintain morale. The winter solstice festivals, from the Celtic Samhain to the Roman Saturnalia, were times for communities to strengthen ties, celebrate together, and ward off the negative forces of winter through communal acts of joy and unity. These practices were as much about psychological survival as they were about physical survival. In the modern world, this tradition persists in the form of holiday gatherings and family reunions. Christmas dinners, New Year's Eve parties, and other winter celebrations continue to be times when families and communities come together, sharing food, music, and stories. While the original rituals have been obscured by time and commercialization, the core intent of these gatherings to bring people together during a time of darkness remains central to the modern experience. Just as ancient people gathered around a hearth to share warmth and hope, so too do we gather today to share joy, create memories, and reaffirm our connections with one another. These modern practices show that despite the passage of time and the shifts in religious and social norms, the deep-rooted traditions of the winter solstice still shape how we celebrate today. The symbolic connection between the darkness of winter and the return of light through figures like Santa Claus, the Yule log, and the communal gatherings remains alive in our winter traditions. We may no longer sacrifice to the gods or burn a sacred log in the same way our ancestors did, but the essence of these rituals continues to thrive in our celebrations of the season. As we explore how these ancient winter myths have survived in modern traditions, we uncover a fascinating journey through time. These myths, though altered by history, culture, and religion, still play a central role in how we understand the world around us and the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. In the next section, we will delve deeper into how these myths have been woven into the fabric of modern culture, continuing to shape our winter celebrations and even influencing our collective psyche. Despite the changes, these ancient stories, born from the darkness of winter, continue to light our way through the coldest months of the year. Did you know that the Christmas tree, the Yule log, and even Santa Claus carry secret meanings dating back thousands of years? What ancient rituals are hidden in plain sight? When we look at modern winter traditions, we might see them as nothing more than festive customs designed to bring joy and light to the coldest months. But if we look deeper, we discover that these seemingly innocent symbols and practices carry with them profound histories, deeply rooted in ancient rituals that focused on survival, hope, and the promise of rebirth. These traditions, long intertwined with the darkest and most mysterious days of the year, have endured through the ages, transforming over time yet retaining echoes of their original meanings. One of the most iconic symbols of the winter season is the Christmas tree. While it's commonly associated with modern Christmas celebrations, its origins stretch far beyond the Christian tradition. The Christmas tree is an adaptation of much older practices, particularly those rooted in pre-Christian winter solstice rituals. In ancient cultures, evergreen trees were seen as symbols of life and renewal during the harsh winter months. The ancient Egyptians, for example, placed green palm branches in their homes during the solstice to symbolize the return of the sun. In northern Europe, the Celts and Norse people celebrated the winter solstice by bringing evergreen trees into their homes, as they believed that these trees represented life's endurance through the darkest season of the year. The idea of the tree of life was prevalent in many ancient traditions, and the Christmas tree as we know it today is a continuation of this symbolism. The act of decorating the tree originally with candles or lights symbolized the return of the sun, a beacon of hope in the darkest days. The Christmas tree, in its original form, was a reminder that, despite the long winter nights, life would continue, and the world would once again be bathed in sunlight. The tradition of adorning the tree with lights and ornaments carries these ancient messages of renewal, even as its meaning has been adapted over time to fit a more secular or commercial context. Equally rich in symbolism is the Yule log, a central feature of ancient winter solstice celebrations that continues to influence Christmas traditions today. In Norse mythology, the Yule log was burned to honor the sun and ensure its return after the darkest night of the year. The log, often a large oak or ash, was carefully chosen, and it was lit with great reverence. The burning of the Yule log was both a ritual of survival and a spiritual offering to the gods. Ashes from the Yule log were kept to bring good luck for the coming year, and some would even sprinkle them around their homes to protect against evil spirits. In medieval Europe, the Yule log was a vital part of Christmas festivities, symbolizing the triumph of light over darkness, life over death. Today, the Yule log has been distilled into the Christmas tradition of a Yule log cake, a dessert shaped like the original log, made from sponge cake and decorated with icing to resemble bark. The once sacred Yule log, with its deep symbolism of rebirth and protection, has been transformed into a festive treat, but the essence of its meaning persists, even in its modern form. When families gather around to share a Yule log cake, they are unknowingly participating in an ancient ritual of renewal and connection, even as the deeper spiritual significance has largely been forgotten. Perhaps the most iconic and enduring symbol of the winter season is the figure of Santa Claus. We all know Santa as the jolly gift bringer of Christmas, but the character of Santa Claus is actually an amalgamation of various mythological figures dating back centuries. The modern-day Santa Claus is heavily based on Saint Nicholas, a 4th century Christian bishop known for his generosity. However, the roots of Santa Claus go much deeper, particularly in his connection to pre-Christian winter deities. One of the most influential of these figures is Odin, the Norse god who was closely associated with the winter solstice. During the Yule festival, Odin was said to ride through the sky on his 8-legged horse, delivering gifts to the people. This image of a gift-bringing, bearded figure who travelled through the skies became intertwined with the later Christian tradition of Saint Nicholas. The modern Santa Claus, with his sleigh and reindeer, echoes Odin's mythical ride, while his red suit and white beard are a direct reference to the depictions of Odin in ancient Norse sagas. The transformation of Odin into Santa Claus is a fascinating example of how ancient winter myths have been adapted over time. As Christianity spread across Europe, the figure of Saint Nicholas gradually absorbed many of these older, pre-Christian attributes. Santa's sleigh, his reindeer, and even his entrance through the chimney are all remnants of older traditions, symbols that once had profound spiritual and ritual significance. Over the years, these elements were secularized and commercialized, but the core of the myth, the idea of a gift bringer who embodies the return of light and warmth during the darkest time of the year, remains intact. In examining these symbols, the Christmas tree, the Yule log, and Santa Claus, it becomes clear that modern winter traditions are deeply rooted in ancient myths that were once vital for survival and spiritual renewal. These traditions, while often stripped of their original meanings, continue to reflect the themes of darkness and rebirth that are so central to the winter solstice. Even as the commercialization of these symbols has diluted their mystical significance, the core ideas of hope, renewal, and survival persist in our collective cultural consciousness. But what happened to the deeper, more mysterious elements of these ancient traditions? Why have so many of these practices been stripped of their original meanings over time? In the next chapter, we will explore how these once powerful rituals were gradually forgotten or obscured, and how modern society has come to embrace more superficial aspects of the winter celebrations. We will look at the forces of secularization, commercialization, and religious transformation that have reshaped these traditions, and how some of the more profound, spiritual elements of winter rituals have been lost in the process. But as we will see, even in their diluted forms, the essence of these ancient traditions continues to influence the way we celebrate today. What if the Christmas traditions we cherish today are remnants of ancient rituals deliberately erased by early Christians? What if the very celebrations we associate with the return of light, joy, and community once had a much darker, more spiritual significance, rooted in practices that were considered dangerous by those in power? The transformation of winter rituals into Christian holidays wasn't simply a matter of cultural evolution. It was a deliberate attempt to reshape society's understanding of the winter months and their spiritual significance. This section will explore how the spread of Christianity across Europe and beyond led to the suppression, transformation, and eventual erasure of many pagan winter traditions. It will also examine the deeper political and spiritual motivations behind these changes, revealing how the winter solstice, once a time of powerful rituals, was redefined within the framework of Christian doctrine. When Christianity spread throughout Europe, it encountered deeply entrenched pagan traditions that celebrated the winter solstice. For centuries, the solstice had been the focal point of rituals that honored the sun's return, bringing light and hope after the longest night of the year. These solstice celebrations were not just about physical survival, they were deeply spiritual, focusing on the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth. In pre-Christian Europe, winter was a time when the powers of darkness seemed strongest, and the solstice represented the victory of light over darkness, of life overcoming death. It was a powerful time of renewal, and people gathered in communities to celebrate, perform rituals, and share meals. The Yule log, the decoration of evergreen trees, and the burning of candles were all part of these ancient solstice festivals, which were intended to protect communities from the long winter and to invite the return of the sun. But as Christianity gained influence, particularly after the conversion of Constantine in the 4th century, these powerful pagan solstice traditions became increasingly at odds with the new faith. The winter solstice, with its association with sun worship and nature spirits, posed a direct challenge to the Christian narrative of Christ's birth and the message of salvation. The solstice festivals, which had been rooted in celebrating the natural world and its cycles, were seen as pagan practices and, therefore, sinful. Christianity sought to replace these ancient rituals with its own holidays and traditions, ones that aligned more closely with Christian teachings and values. One of the most significant shifts occurred with the establishment of Christmas on December 25th. While the exact date of Christ's birth is not recorded in the Bible, the decision to place it near the winter solstice was no coincidence. Early Christians adopted the solstice as the time for Christ's birth, in an effort to Christianize the pagan celebrations that centered around the sun's return. By aligning the birth of Christ with the solstice, the Church could supplant the old rituals and offer a new, Christian meaning to the very same season of darkness and renewal. The symbolism was clear. Just as the sun returned to the sky after the solstice, so too did the light of Christ enter the world. In doing so, the Christian calendar absorbed the meaning of the solstice, but redefined it to serve the Christian narrative of salvation. The celebration of Christ's birth on December 25th was just one aspect of this broader effort to redefine the winter season. Many of the rituals associated with the winter solstice, such as the Yule log, the Christmas tree, and the lighting of candles, were Christianized or abandoned altogether. The Yule log, for instance, was originally part of a larger Norse and Celtic tradition meant to bring warmth and light to the coldest days of the year, symbolizing the sun's return. Early Christians, however, adapted the Yule log into a Christian tradition, linking it with the symbolic birth of Christ and often using it in religious ceremonies to honor the light of Christ rather than the literal sun. The Christmas tree, too, has roots in ancient pagan traditions. In pre-Christian Europe, the evergreen tree represented life and renewal during the darkest time of the year. The practice of bringing evergreen branches or trees into the home was a way of honoring nature's resilience in the face of winter's harshness. Early Christians, however, turned the tree into a symbol of Christ, with the tree now representing the tree of life and the eternal life brought by Jesus. The act of decorating the tree, once a ritual honoring the natural world, was absorbed into the Christian tradition and became a way of celebrating the light of Christ's birth. However, not all ancient traditions were so easily co-opted into the Christian framework. Many of the more pagan aspects of winter celebrations were outright suppressed or banned by the Church. The practice of honoring the dead, which was prevalent in many cultures during the winter months, was particularly troublesome for early Christians. In many ancient cultures, the winter solstice was a time to honor ancestors and spirits, as it was believed that the boundary between the living and the dead was thinnest during the darkest days of the year. These practices, which included offerings to spirits and attempts to communicate with the dead, were seen as dangerous and heretical by Christian authorities. As a result, the Church worked to eliminate these practices, replacing them with Christian prayers for the dead and reinterpreting the solstice as a time for the birth of Christ, rather than a spiritual connection with the otherworldly forces. This process of Christianizing winter rituals didn't happen overnight. Over the course of centuries, the Church worked to eliminate or transform pagan customs into Christian practices, even as elements of the old traditions were retained in altered forms. The Church's strategy was both spiritual and political. By absorbing and reshaping the winter solstice rituals, Christianity not only controlled the spiritual lives of its followers, but also cemented its power over local traditions and the festivals that defined the agricultural and social calendars. As Christianity spread beyond Europe, these shifts continued. In regions where Christianity encountered existing pagan beliefs, such as in parts of Africa, the Americas, and Asia, similar transformations occurred. Local winter traditions, often based on ancestral worship, agricultural cycles, or seasonal renewal, were gradually absorbed into Christian celebrations or suppressed altogether. Even the very figure of Santa Claus, once rooted in Norse mythology and later merged with the Christian Saint Nicholas, is an example of this adaptation. What began as a folkloric figure associated with the return of light during winter became a distinctly Christian figure, one who brings gifts to children in the name of goodwill and charity. The transformation of Santa Claus, like the Yule log and Christmas tree, reflects the larger Christian effort to reframe winter rituals within a new religious context. In this way, Christianity didn't just replace old traditions, it reshaped them to fit its narrative, erasing much of the old symbolic meaning while retaining key cultural practices. The winter solstice, once a time for honoring nature, spirits, and the cycles of life and death, became a celebration of Christ's birth, a symbolic triumph of spiritual light over the physical darkness of winter. The powerful, pagan rituals that centered on death, rebirth, and the return of the sun were transformed into celebrations of the Christian faith, with much of the ancient meaning obscured or forgotten. This leads us to the next question. Was this suppression of ancient winter traditions a coincidence, or was there a deliberate effort to control how people celebrated the winter months? Was it simply a case of cultural evolution, or was there a conscious attempt by religious and political forces to reshape these rituals to serve a new agenda? In the following section, we will examine how the Industrial Revolution and the commercialization of winter customs further stripped away the deeper, spiritual elements of these traditions, transforming them into the consumer-driven celebrations we recognize today. What if the holiday traditions we know today are nothing more than a product of mass marketing? How did the true meaning of winter rituals get lost in a sea of advertisements and consumer goods? The rise of industrialization in the 19th and 20th centuries brought with it profound changes to the way we celebrated the winter months. What was once a time for communal rituals, spiritual reflection, and deep-seated traditions became a backdrop for consumer-driven celebrations. The commercialization of holidays like Christmas shifted the focus from the ancient, symbolic meaning of these festivals to the acquisition of goods, the promotion of products, and the creation of a market for seasonal indulgences. In the process, many of the deeper, spiritual connections to winter's ancient traditions were overshadowed by the bright, ever-present lure of consumerism. The Industrial Revolution fundamentally altered the way people lived, worked, and celebrated. As factories sprouted up and mass production became the norm, the focus of society shifted from agricultural cycles and communal gatherings to urban life and factory labor. In a world of mass-produced goods, the personal, spiritual, and communal aspects of holidays began to fade in favor of a more standardized, profit-driven model of celebration. The winter solstice, once a moment to reflect on life, death, and the eternal cycles of nature, was gradually overshadowed by the commercialization of Christmas, which became increasingly detached from its spiritual roots. One of the most visible changes came with the rise of Christmas trees, a tradition that had deep roots in pre-Christian solstice celebrations. While the Christmas tree originally symbolized life, renewal, and the return of the sun during the darkest part of the year, it soon became a symbol of consumerism. In the 19th century, as Christmas became more commercialized, the practice of decorating trees spread rapidly, but with a shift in meaning. The tree became a focal point not only for family gatherings but also for the exchange of gifts, and its decorations began to reflect the rise of a consumer culture. By the 20th century, the tree was no longer just a symbol of nature's resilience or the triumph of light over darkness. It became a marketable object, one that was sold, adorned with store-bought trinkets, and often used as a symbol of affluence and materialism. The idea of the Christmas tree as a sacred symbol of life was replaced with its status as a holiday decoration, bought and sold in mass quantities. Retailers capitalized on this new tradition, offering everything from artificial trees to elaborate ornaments, turning a once sacred ritual into a consumer-driven spectacle. Gift-giving, another central component of modern Christmas celebrations, was also significantly influenced by the rise of industrialization. While giving gifts had always been a part of winter solstice celebrations, it was traditionally a more personal, meaningful exchange, often tied to acts of charity or the sharing of resources during a difficult time of year. However, as the industrial age progressed, gift-giving became commodified. In the early 20th century, retailers and advertisers saw an opportunity to create an entire market around holiday shopping. The idea of buying gifts for everyone on your list, often mass-produced and impersonal, quickly gained popularity. Advertisements and marketing campaigns, such as those by Coca-Cola, helped to cement this shift. In fact, Coca-Cola played a crucial role in reshaping the image of Santa Claus. While Santa Claus had already evolved from earlier traditions, rooted in Norse mythology and St. Nicholas, it was Coca-Cola's 1,930 seconds ad campaign that solidified the modern image of Santa as the jolly, red-suited figure we know today. Santa Claus was no longer just a symbol of winter's generosity or a spiritual figure tied to the return of the light. He became a marketing tool, used to sell everything from soda to toys. The commercialization of Santa Claus turned him into a figure of consumer desire, replacing the deeper, more mystical aspects of winter traditions with a figure who embodied the power of advertising and the pursuit of material goods. These shifts weren't just about changing the way people celebrated, they were about redefining the meaning of the celebration itself. The winter solstice, once a powerful symbol of life, death, and the cyclical nature of the universe, had become subordinated to the interests of commerce. Holidays like Christmas, once centered around themes of spiritual renewal and community bonding, had been transformed into opportunities for consumer indulgence. The exchange of gifts became less about the meaning behind the gift and more about the act of consumption itself. The need to buy, wrap, and give goods became the central focus, rather than the deeper, more symbolic meanings of generosity, togetherness, and light. This commercialization of winter holidays wasn't confined to Christmas alone. Over the years, other celebrations associated with the winter months, such as New Year's Eve, became increasingly influenced by consumer culture. What had once been a time for spiritual reflection, honoring the past year, and preparing for the future became just another marketing opportunity for companies. New Year's Eve parties, once simple communal gatherings, became a commercialized spectacle, complete with expensive outfits, champagne sales, and extravagant celebrations designed to sell products and experiences. The true meaning of these celebrations, rooted in renewal and introspection, became diluted by the incessant pressure to spend and consume. While this shift toward commercialization may seem like a natural evolution, it's important to recognize that it wasn't entirely a result of organic cultural change. Marketing and advertising played a critical role in shaping the way people understood and experienced winter holidays. Advertisers and corporations recognized that the winter season offered a unique opportunity to influence people's buying habits, and they worked tirelessly to capitalize on it. Christmas became not only a time for religious observance, but also the most important retail season of the year, with companies shaping holiday traditions around their products. This commodification of winter celebrations has led to a significant loss of the deeper spiritual and communal aspects of these traditions. What was once a time to honor the cycles of nature, reflect on the past year, and celebrate the return of light has been increasingly overshadowed by the pursuit of material goods and the pressure to keep up with commercial trends. The deeper, more meaningful rituals that once connected people to the natural world and to each other have been pushed to the margins, replaced by superficial customs designed to sell products and create profit. As we look at this shift, we must ask, what has been lost in the transition to commercialization? How much of the true meaning of winter traditions once tied to the return of light, spiritual renewal, and communal survival has been erased or obscured by consumerism? What can we rediscover about these traditions if we look beyond the glittering surface of modern holiday celebrations? In the next section, we will explore how these lost practices can be reclaimed and how we can reconnect with the deeper, more meaningful aspects of winter rituals, even in an increasingly commercialized world. Could political forces be behind the transformation of ancient winter traditions? What if Christmas wasn't just about Christ's birth, but about shaping the future of society? Throughout history, winter traditions have not only been shaped by culture and religion, but also by political and social movements. Governments and political regimes have recognized the power of these festivals to unify people, control the narrative, and shape national identities. The transformation of ancient winter rituals such as Christmas and other solstice celebrations often went beyond cultural evolution. Political leaders have used winter traditions as tools for societal manipulation, redefinition, and social cohesion. This section will explore how political movements have deliberately suppressed, altered, or co-opted winter rituals to further their agendas, and how these shifts have affected the way winter holidays are celebrated today. One of the earliest and most well-documented examples of political suppression of winter traditions can be found in early America, during the colonial era. In the 17th century, the Puritans, who had settled in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, believed that the celebrations surrounding Christmas were too hedonistic and unbiblical. In 1659, the Puritan government passed a law that banned Christmas celebrations in an attempt to rid society of what they saw as pagan and excessive behavior. Christmas trees, feasts, and even the simple act of saying Merry Christmas were forbidden. Instead, the Puritans promoted a more austere, religious approach to winter holidays, focusing on prayer and reflection rather than festive celebration. The move to suppress Christmas was part of a larger effort to enforce strict religious observance and moral codes. While the ban was never fully successful, it is a clear example of how a political regime sought to redefine an important cultural tradition, aligning it more closely with their religious and social values. The 19th century saw a shift, especially with the rise of Victorian Christmas traditions in England. But the holiday was not yet universally accepted across Europe, particularly in regions that had been dominated by more rigid religious structures or authoritarian regimes. In countries like Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 marked the beginning of a new era for winter holidays. The Soviet Union, under the leadership of Lenin and later Stalin, actively sought to suppress Christmas and other religious holidays in favor of promoting secular, socialist celebrations. The winter solstice, which had been a time for both pagan and Christian rituals, was no longer celebrated with the religious fervor it had once been. The Soviet government replaced Christmas with New Year's celebrations, which were framed as more fitting for the socialist state. New Year's was imbued with nationalistic symbolism, aligning with Soviet values of collective strength and progress. The figure of Ded Moroz, Grandfather Frost, a character who had roots in pre-Christian winter celebrations, was reimagined as a more secular figure, serving as a way to promote the state's agenda while still retaining some elements of traditional festivity. This transformation of the holiday served both to control the public's cultural practices and to redirect social attention toward the state and its vision of the future. Similarly, during the 1930 seconds and 1940 seconds, Nazi Germany sought to manipulate the solstice and other winter traditions to promote a nationalistic, racially charged ideology. The Nazi regime sought to redefine winter traditions, such as the Yule Festival, which had long been a celebration of light's return, by recasting them as expressions of Aryan identity and Germanic paganism. The Nazis emphasized ancient Germanic and Nordic traditions, attempting to distance these practices from their Christian associations. The figure of Father Christmas was replaced by the more austere and nationalistic character of the Germanic Yule Man, who embodied the mythic ideals of racial purity and strength. The Nazis also adopted the Yule log, reinterpreting it as a symbol of the racial and spiritual rebirth of Germany, tying it to the regime's propaganda. This manipulation of winter traditions was part of a broader effort to create a new, unified cultural identity that was in line with the Nazi vision, seeking to erase Jewish, Christian, and other non-Germanic influences from the country's cultural fabric. By co-opting and altering ancient traditions, the Nazis aimed to control the cultural and spiritual landscape, using winter rituals to reinforce their ideological beliefs. In the United States, the commercialization of Christmas in the 20th century also had a political dimension. As the country grew wealthier and more consumer-driven, Christmas, once a simple religious and familial observance, became increasingly commodified. The early days of the Christmas shopping season were driven by retailers looking to cash in on the holiday rush. But by the mid-20th century, this commercial aspect took on a more insidious political influence. The rise of mass marketing, advertising, and consumer culture made Christmas a vital part of the American economy. Corporations like Coca-Cola played a significant role in shaping the image of Santa Claus into the friendly, red-suited figure we know today, using the figure to sell products. The Santa Claus advertising campaigns of the 1930 seconds and beyond helped to create a Christmas ideal centered not around religious devotion, but around material consumption. This shift was not accidental. It was part of a deliberate effort to promote consumerism as an essential component of American identity, intertwining the holiday with capitalist ideals. What these examples illustrate is how winter traditions, particularly around Christmas and the winter solstice, have often been used to shape public consciousness and reinforce political agendas. Whether through religious suppression, nationalistic reinvention, or the commercialization of holidays, political forces have had a profound impact on how winter holidays are celebrated. The traditional symbols of winter, the Yule log, the Christmas tree, even Santa Claus, were not merely passed down through generations. They were reshaped and refashioned by those in power to reflect specific political, religious, and social goals. As we continue to explore the evolution of winter traditions, we must ask, what has been lost in this political manipulation of winter customs? How much of the true, spiritual meaning behind these rituals has been erased or obscured by political control? How have these ancient practices been diluted, twisted, or entirely replaced to fit modern agendas? In the next section, we will dive deeper into the erasure of these ancient traditions and the forces that have sought to replace them, examining the lasting impact of this cultural shift and considering what remnants of these practices have survived into the present day. What if the long-lost traditions of winter aren't lost at all? Could the dark rituals of ancient times be making a comeback in ways we never expected? As the world has become more modern, industrialized, and consumer-driven, many people have begun to feel disconnected from the spiritual and cultural roots that once grounded their lives. In response, there has been a growing movement to rediscover, reclaim, and celebrate ancient winter rituals that honor the cycles of nature, the return of light, and the deep connection between life and death. Today, groups around the world are seeking to bring back these forgotten traditions, reviving the practices of old in ways that resonate with contemporary values like spirituality, ecological awareness, and a desire for more meaningful holiday experiences. One of the most visible resurgences of ancient winter rituals is happening within neo-pagan and Wiccan communities. These groups have long honored the winter solstice, or Yule, as a central celebration in their spiritual calendars. Yule, which aligns with the winter solstice, marks the rebirth of the sun and is deeply rooted in pre-Christian traditions. For many neo-pagans, Yule represents a time to reflect on the cycles of life, death, and rebirth, an acknowledgement of both the darkness of winter and the hope of the returning light. While these celebrations have always been part of neo-paganism, in recent years they have gained increasing popularity, especially as people search for deeper spiritual practices outside of mainstream religion. These modern Yule celebrations are often a blend of ancient customs and contemporary sensibilities. For example, many neo-pagan groups celebrate with bonfires, candlelit rituals, and the decorating of evergreens echoing the Yule log and the symbolic tree of life from ancient times. In these rituals, participants honor the sun's return, affirming the promise of renewal in the coming year. The winter solstice is seen not just as an astronomical event, but as a spiritual one, embodying themes of personal transformation, renewal, and connection with the Earth's natural cycles. Through these practices, people are reconnecting with ancient spiritual customs and reclaiming a sense of meaning in the winter months, away from the commercialized, secularized versions of the holidays that dominate mainstream culture. Another area where ancient winter rituals are resurfacing is within environmental and ecological movements. As concerns about climate change and the disconnection of modern life from the natural world grow, many environmental groups are turning to older, pre-industrial customs as a way to foster a deeper respect for the Earth and its cycles. The winter solstice, once a time of deep connection to the rhythms of the natural world, is being reimagined as a way to reconnect with these cycles, to honor the Earth's resilience, and to reflect on humanity's role in preserving the planet. Many eco-conscious individuals are embracing rituals centered around sustainability, honoring the land, and reconnecting with the seasons in more meaningful ways. These modern adaptations of ancient traditions can be seen in various ways. For example, some people now celebrate the solstice with outdoor gatherings, nature walks, and tree planting as a way to honor the Earth and mark the seasonal shift. These activities not only reflect ancient practices of celebrating the return of light, but also respond to the urgent need to acknowledge and heal our planet in the face of environmental destruction. This resurgence of ecological awareness during the winter solstice echoes the ancient beliefs that human survival is deeply tied to the natural world and that our well-being is intertwined with the cycles of life, death, and rebirth that the winter months represent. Beyond neo-pagan and environmental circles, elements of ancient winter rituals have begun to resurface in secular and non-traditional contexts. Many people who are not aligned with any specific religious or spiritual practice are increasingly looking for meaningful ways to observe the winter season. In response to the commercialization of the holidays and the stress of consumer-driven celebrations, there has been a quiet but powerful movement toward creating more intentional, reflective, and soulful celebrations of the season. People are embracing practices such as mindfulness, meditation, and simple, family-centered gatherings, which echo the quiet, introspective aspects of ancient solstice celebrations. For example, rather than focusing solely on the frenzy of gift-giving, some families have returned to the tradition of gathering around the hearth or candlelit table, sharing food, stories, and reflections on the past year. These gatherings are intended to honor the passage of time, to give thanks for the blessings of the year, and to reconnect with the deeper meaning of the winter season. Many individuals are also embracing simple rituals, such as creating homemade gifts, lighting candles, or spending time in nature, acts that, though simple, connect them to ancient practices of honoring the solstice and the natural world. This revival of ancient winter traditions reflects a broader cultural shift towards authenticity and mindfulness, where people are seeking to reclaim rituals and experiences that hold personal and spiritual significance, rather than those dictated by consumerism and commercial pressures. As society becomes increasingly aware of the superficiality of modern holiday celebrations, many are returning to these timeless rituals as a way to ground themselves in something more meaningful and lasting. Interestingly, these revivals are not happening solely in the Western world. Across the globe, there has been a resurgence of interest in indigenous practices that honor the solstice and the changing of seasons. In places like South America, some communities are reawakening ancient Andean solstice traditions that involve ceremonies to honor the Earth's cycles and the sun's return. These traditions, though often practiced for thousands of years, were suppressed during colonization, but are now being reclaimed by indigenous peoples seeking to restore cultural and spiritual practices that were once lost. In other parts of the world, such as Africa and Asia, similar seasonal and solstice rituals are being revived, often tied to themes of fertility, agriculture, and honoring ancestral spirits. What makes these modern adaptations and revivals so significant is that they are not simply regurgitating ancient customs, they are reshaping them to fit contemporary needs and values. These rituals, whether in the form of spiritual gatherings, environmental activism, or simple family traditions, are infused with new meanings that reflect current concerns such as environmental sustainability, mental well-being, and the need for deeper community connections. While the rituals themselves may be ancient, their relevance in today's world speaks to the ongoing human desire for connection to the earth, to each other, and to something greater than the commercialized holiday experience. As these ancient traditions begin to resurface, we must ask ourselves, what role do they play in today's world? What do these revived rituals teach us about our collective past, and what might they offer us in the future? Are they a form of spiritual and cultural resistance to the consumerism that has overshadowed the winter season for so long? And how can we embrace these revived practices in ways that connect us to the past, while also shaping a more meaningful and sustainable future? In the next section, we will look more closely at how these ancient rituals are being reshaped for the modern era, and how they reflect the current social and cultural climate. We'll explore how these revived practices are influencing today's holiday celebrations, offering a bridge between the ancient and the modern, and reintroducing spiritual and communal aspects that were once lost. Could the revival of ancient winter traditions be more than just nostalgia? How are modern celebrations reinventing these old customs for the 21st century? As the world becomes more interconnected and increasingly focused on sustainability, mindfulness, and inclusivity, ancient winter traditions are undergoing a transformation. No longer are these rituals just relics of the past. They are being adapted to fit contemporary values, reimagined through a lens of ecological awareness, spirituality, and social cohesion. The result is a blending of old and new, a beautiful fusion of ancient customs with modern sensibilities that breathe new life into the way we celebrate the winter season. In the modern world, people are rediscovering the rich symbolism and communal power embedded in ancient winter rituals, from solstice celebrations to Christmas traditions. These rituals, once primarily spiritual or tied to survival, are now taking on new meanings, often informed by a desire for mindfulness and connection to the natural world. The winter solstice, which once marked a spiritual turning point when the light began its return, is now celebrated in new ways by people seeking to reconnect with both the natural world and their own inner worlds. For instance, the resurgence of modern-day solstice festivals, often organized by neo-pagan groups, represents a conscious effort to revive these traditions in a contemporary context. These festivals often feature candlelight processions, fire circles, drumming, and song, all aimed at symbolizing the triumph of light over darkness. The rituals are about more than honoring the return of the sun. They're about reflection, renewal, and collective intention setting for the year ahead. These New Age solstice festivals may draw heavily from ancient traditions, but they also reflect a deep concern with sustainability and social responsibility. Celebrants are often encouraged to be mindful of their environmental impact, and practices such as sustainable eating, using biodegradable materials, and recycling are woven into the festivities. This modern adaptation of ancient solstice rituals speaks to the growing trend of combining spirituality with ecological awareness, where honoring the earth and the cycles of nature is central to the celebration. The emphasis is on the unity of the community, the health of the planet, and the nourishment of the soul, all themes that were present in ancient celebrations but have become more relevant in today's climate-conscious world. While solstice festivals reflect the revival of ancient practices in the realm of neo-paganism, the modern Christmas celebration also serves as a key example of how older traditions have been adapted and redefined. Many of the symbols associated with Christmas, such as the Christmas tree, the Yule log, and even Santa Claus, have been reinterpreted for a modern, secular audience. For example, the Christmas tree, once a sacred symbol of life and the return of the sun, has evolved into a family tradition of decorating with lights and ornaments, creating a shared space for connection and reflection. The tree's original meaning, rooted in the ancient celebration of the solstice, has been retained in part but transformed into a secular and social symbol of togetherness during the holiday season. Similarly, the tradition of the Yule log, originally a large piece of wood burned to honor the sun and bring light into the darkest days of the year, has been adapted into the Christmas Yule log cake, a fun and festive dessert enjoyed by families around the world. While the meaning of the Yule log as a symbol of cosmic renewal has been diluted, the practice of gathering together around a symbolic representation of light, warmth, and food continues to unite families and communities. In this adaptation, the essence of the original ritual is still present, albeit in a much lighter, more commercialized form. One of the most profound shifts in modern celebrations of winter traditions is the rise of secular and inclusive holiday celebrations that aim to honor all cultural and spiritual traditions. As societies have become more diverse, many people have sought ways to celebrate the winter season in a way that respects all beliefs and practices. This has led to the creation of new rituals and community celebrations that draw on multiple cultural traditions, often blending elements of Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, winter solstice observances, and even secular celebrations like New Year's Eve. For example, community celebrations that include lighting candles for Hanukkah, sharing a meal for Kwanzaa, and honoring the winter solstice may all take place in a single gathering, allowing people from different backgrounds to share in the season's universal themes of light, rebirth, and community. These inclusive celebrations emphasize the importance of diversity, equity, and understanding, offering a more comprehensive approach to winter traditions that respects multiple cultural heritages. This shift toward inclusivity has also given rise to a more mindful approach to the holiday season. As consumerism has increasingly overshadowed the deeper meanings of winter traditions, many people are now seeking more authentic and intentional ways to celebrate. This has led to a revival of simpler, more meaningful practices that honor family, nature, and community. Rather than focusing on the commercial aspects of gift-giving or the pressure to buy and consume, many people are returning to the core values of winter rituals: togetherness, gratitude, and reflection. The practice of creating homemade gifts, baking together, or volunteering for those in need has become an increasingly popular way of celebrating. These activities harken back to a time when the winter months were not only about surviving the physical cold, but also about fostering warmth in relationships and communities. Whether through cooking a communal meal or gathering for a solstice meditation, modern adaptations of ancient winter traditions are rooted in a desire to reconnect with what truly matters: personal and collective well-being, the health of the earth, and spiritual renewal. Even the figure of Santa Claus, while heavily commercialized, has undergone a modern transformation, moving beyond consumer-driven depictions to reflect values such as generosity, kindness, and love. Many contemporary interpretations of Santa emphasize his role in promoting goodwill, kindness, and acts of charity, moving away from the purely materialistic aspects of the tradition. This modern version of Santa Claus retains some of his ancient mythological roots, like the gift bringer and the figure tied to the return of light, but he is now a more inclusive, compassionate figure who reflects the desire for community and collective care. What's remarkable about these modern adaptations is that they are not simply about nostalgia for past practices. Rather, they represent a conscious effort to reshape winter traditions for a world that increasingly values sustainability, mindfulness, and inclusivity. These celebrations are reimagined to address contemporary concerns like environmental stewardship, mental well-being, and social unity, while still honoring the ancient customs that connected people to the earth and the cosmos. In doing so, these revived practices bridge the gap between past and present, reminding us that winter traditions are not static relics, but living, evolving rituals that continue to offer meaning and connection in our rapidly changing world. As we look at how these ancient traditions are reshaping the way we experience winter, it's clear that there is a growing movement toward reclaiming and adapting these practices to fit modern needs. But what new meanings are emerging from these revived traditions, and how are they reshaping our understanding of the winter season? In the next chapter, we'll explore the philosophical and existential implications of these resurgent rituals, examining what they tell us about the cyclical nature of life and death, renewal, and the interconnectedness of all things. What if ancient winter traditions could hold the key to healing the planet? Could the return of these rituals offer a solution to today's ecological crises? In a world facing environmental degradation, climate change, and widespread disconnection from nature, many modern spiritual and ecological movements are turning to ancient traditions for guidance. These movements, seeking to reconnect with the earth and restore balance to human life, have found inspiration in the winter rituals and solstice celebrations practiced by our ancestors. Today, groups ranging from neo-pagans to environmental activists are reviving these ancient customs, adapting them to contemporary values of sustainability, spiritual renewal, and ecological consciousness. By looking to the past, these movements are reimagining winter celebrations as a time not only for personal reflection, but also for healing the planet and strengthening our connection to the earth. One of the most significant ways in which ancient winter traditions are being revived is through solstice celebrations. Neo-pagan and Wiccan communities, in particular, have long honored the winter solstice as a time of spiritual rebirth and reflection. These solstice rituals are rooted in the ancient belief that the return of the sun at the darkest time of the year symbolizes hope, renewal, and the cyclical nature of life. But in modern times, these rituals have expanded to include a focus on environmental and social consciousness. In many neo-pagan solstice gatherings, participants come together not only to celebrate the return of the light, but also to reflect on the state of the planet, to perform acts of gratitude, and to engage in eco-friendly practices. For example, many groups now host solstice festivals that emphasize sustainable living, such as using recycled materials for decorations, reducing waste, and focusing on local, plant-based foods for feasts. These solstice celebrations, once centered around the cosmic return of the sun, now serve as a call to action, urging people to reconnect with the earth and its natural rhythms while cultivating a spirit of community care. At the heart of this revival is a growing recognition of the interconnectedness between spirituality and ecology. Spiritual seekers are drawn to the ancient understanding that human life is deeply intertwined with the Earth's cycles. The winter solstice, in particular, has become a time to honor not only the sun's return, but also the vital relationship between human beings and the environment. The turning of the year, as symbolized by the solstice, invites a moment of reflection on our role in protecting and sustaining the planet. Solstice rituals often include acts of stewardship, such as planting trees, creating sustainable living spaces, and making commitments to protect the natural world. These rituals are rooted in the ancient understanding that humans are part of a much larger system and that our actions have an impact on the world around us. Environmental organizations, too, have recognized the power of these revived winter traditions in fostering ecological consciousness. As the environmental movement has grown, many groups have turned to the solstice and other ancient rituals as a way to inspire action and encourage sustainable practices. For example, groups like the Earth Day Network have begun incorporating solstice celebrations into their annual calendar, using this time of the year to raise awareness about climate change, environmental degradation, and the importance of respecting the Earth's cycles. The symbolism of the solstice, representing both the darkest and the most hopeful moment of the year, serves as a powerful reminder of the urgency of addressing ecological crises, while also offering hope for a brighter, more sustainable future. In this way, ancient traditions are being reclaimed not only as spiritual practices, but as tools for environmental advocacy and action. These winter rituals are also about fostering a sense of community and collective responsibility. In an age of increasing individualism and disconnection from local communities, the revival of winter traditions provides a powerful antidote. Solstice celebrations, winter feasts, and other gatherings bring people together to share in a collective experience of reflection, renewal, and action. These community-centered rituals emphasize the importance of collaboration and mutual care values that are essential both for building resilient communities and for addressing the global environmental challenges we face today. Rather than simply celebrating as individuals or focusing on personal consumption, these modern winter rituals encourage participants to think about the larger community, both human and ecological, and how our actions can contribute to the well-being of all. As these ancient traditions are revived and reinterpreted, they also reflect a growing desire to return to simpler, more sustainable ways of living. Many people are increasingly rejecting the consumerism and excess that have come to dominate the winter holiday season. Instead, they are embracing practices that honor the Earth's resources and promote sustainability. This can be seen in the rise of homemade gifts, DIY decorations, and a return to meaningful, less materialistic ways of celebrating. People are moving away from the wasteful practices of mass consumerism and rediscovering the joy of making things by hand, focusing on creating memories rather than accumulating things. This shift is not only a reaction to the environmental crisis, but also a deeper, more personal yearning for connection to the natural world and to each other. The revival of ancient winter traditions also speaks to a larger cultural shift, a movement away from the superficiality of modern consumer culture and back toward deeper, more meaningful experiences. In today's fast-paced, technology-driven world, the seasonal rhythms of nature and the cycles of the earth often feel distant or irrelevant. But by rediscovering these ancient traditions, people are reconnecting with the wisdom of our ancestors and the earth's natural cycles. They are finding spiritual and ecological renewal in the rituals that once marked the changing of the seasons and the return of light. Ultimately, these revived winter traditions are about much more than nostalgia or an attempt to recreate the past. They are part of a larger movement to reshape the way we live, think, and celebrate. By reintroducing ancient rituals in a modern context, people are finding new ways to honor the earth, nurture their communities, and reconnect with the spiritual aspects of life that modernity has often overlooked. These rituals remind us that, no matter how far we've come from our ancient roots, the cycles of nature are still with us, and we still have the power to shape the future with our actions. As we continue to explore the revival of ancient winter customs, we must ask, what new meanings are emerging from these revived traditions? How are they reshaping our understanding of winter, the earth, and our place in the natural world? In the next chapter, we will delve deeper into the philosophical and existential significance of these resurgent rituals, examining how they challenge us to reconsider our relationship with nature, community, and the cycles of life and death. What if the darkness of winter isn't something to fear, but a gift? What profound insights can we uncover when we embrace the stillness of winter's long nights? Throughout history, winter has been seen as a time of profound spiritual and existential significance. A season not just to survive, but to reflect, renew, and reconsider the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The harshness of winter, with its cold, long nights and desolate landscapes, has often been interpreted as a necessary pause, a moment to step back, reflect on the past, and prepare for the promise of renewal. Far from being merely a time of hardship or mere survival, winter has been imbued with deep symbolic meaning in cultures across the globe. In ancient cultures, the arrival of winter was not only a physical change, but also a spiritual one. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year, marked a turning point in the natural world when darkness was at its peak, but the sun was reborn. This transition from darkness to light, from death to life, was rich with metaphor. For early agricultural societies, winter's long nights offered a pause in the relentless cycle of work, planting, and harvesting. It was a time to reflect on the cycles of nature and life itself. The dark months were not seen as a void, but as a space in which introspection, spiritual renewal, and the preparation for new beginnings could occur. Winter was often viewed as a metaphor for the cycles of life and death. The barrenness of the land during winter reflected the cycles of life that would, in time, come to an end. But winter also held the promise of rebirth, of the return of spring. The long nights and harsh conditions forced individuals and communities to slow down and reassess their place in the world, to look inward, to reflect on what truly mattered. For many cultures, winter was a time for spiritual contemplation. Ancient cultures understood that just as the seasons change, so too did the human experience. Winter, in this sense, became a time to honor both the endings and the beginnings, the death of the old and the birth of the new. One of the most poignant aspects of winter rituals is their focus on renewal. Winter, with all its darkness and stillness, carries the promise of the return of light. The winter solstice was celebrated as the triumph of light over darkness, a powerful reminder that no matter how harsh the winter, the sun would inevitably return. This cosmic event was seen as a spiritual and psychological metaphor for personal renewal. Just as the sun's return promised a new cycle of growth, winter rituals encouraged individuals to consider their own inner cycles, their growth, challenges, and personal transformations. This pause, as nature seemed to pause during the dark months, allowed people to slow down, evaluate, and prepare for the eventual renewal of life in spring. For early agrarian societies, winter was not merely a season of dormancy, it was a time of spiritual reflection and preparation. The harsh winter conditions meant that families had to rely on their stores of food and warmth, creating a space for inward contemplation. People came together during the long nights to share stories, to reconnect with each other, and to honor the spirits of the ancestors. The warmth of the hearth and the glow of candles became symbols not only of physical warmth but of spiritual connection. These rituals helped people survive not just the cold months but the emotional and spiritual isolation that often came with them. This focus on renewal is not just a relic of ancient practices. Today, many modern spiritual movements are embracing the idea of winter as a time of reflection and rebirth. In neo-pagan traditions, the winter solstice Yule continues to be a celebration of light's return, a time to honor both the end of the year and the new beginnings it brings. During this time, practitioners often perform rituals focused on letting go of the past year's burdens, challenges, and sorrows in preparation for new growth. These rituals are deeply rooted in the ancient understanding that winter is a time to pause, reflect, and make space for something new to emerge. For individuals seeking more secular or personal interpretations of winter, the season is increasingly viewed as an opportunity for introspection and mindfulness. In a fast-paced world, winter offers a natural time to slow down, rest, and recalibrate. The long nights, while often associated with dreariness, can also provide a unique opportunity for deep reflection. People may choose to spend more time indoors, not just to escape the cold, but to find stillness in their own lives, to meditate, journal, and reflect on the year gone by. The reflective nature of winter is a time to prioritize self-care, introspection, and even spiritual practices that help reconnect individuals to themselves and the larger cycles of the natural world. This period of rest, coupled with the reflection it inspires, allows individuals to find new meaning in the everyday. Much like ancient cultures, modern practices of self-reflection and mindfulness during winter echo the recognition that this dark season is not to be feared, but embraced as a time for deep introspection and spiritual growth. Just as the earth rests and prepares for the spring, people too can rest, heal, and prepare themselves for the new beginnings of the coming year. Winter is not simply a time of coldness or dormancy, it is a time for the seeds of new growth to be planted, both literally and metaphorically. The rebirth, symbolized by winter's darkest moments, also carries a universal message. There is always light after the darkness. This powerful metaphor is found in nearly every cultural and spiritual tradition that honors the solstice and winter season. The long nights, the death of the old year, and the coldness of winter are balanced by the promise of a new cycle, whether through the return of the sun, the return of life, or the rebirth of the soul. Winter's darkness is not an end, but a beginning, a reminder that even in the harshest of seasons, there is always potential for renewal. Winter, therefore, serves as a mirror to the human condition. It reminds us that life is cyclical, that death and rebirth are natural parts of the human experience. The darkness of winter is a time for introspection, for letting go of the past, and for preparing for the renewal that comes with the return of the light. In this way, winter becomes a deeply philosophical season, inviting us to contemplate our own lives, our relationships, and our place in the world. As we honor these ancient traditions and the symbolism of the season, we find not only a connection to the past, but a profound source of wisdom for living in the present. As we move forward in our exploration of winter traditions, we will examine how this tension between light and darkness, the eternal struggle between life and death, has been expressed in the mythology and rituals of the season. The symbolism of winter, as a time of reflection and rebirth, leads us into a deeper understanding of the spiritual and philosophical significance of the winter season. In the next section, we will explore how these dualities are embodied in the stories and rituals that have shaped winter celebrations across cultures. Why does humanity continue to light candles in the darkest months of the year? Could this ancient symbolism be a deeper reflection of the human condition? Throughout history, the contrast between light and darkness has served as one of the most powerful and enduring symbols in human culture. In the winter months, as the nights stretch long and the sun seems to retreat, this dichotomy becomes especially potent. Light, in its many forms, has been an enduring symbol of hope, rebirth, and divine presence, while darkness has represented both the unknown and the cyclical nature of life and death. From the lighting of candles during the darkest nights to the symbolic return of the sun after the winter solstice, the interplay between light and darkness has been central to how we understand the human experience and the mysteries of the universe. In many cultures, winter celebrations have emphasized the need to bring light into the world, not just physically but spiritually. The act of lighting candles during the darkest months of the year is a ritual found in many traditions, from the menorah of Hanukkah to the Christmas tree lights that adorn homes across the world. These lights are not simply decorations, they are expressions of hope in the face of darkness. The flickering flame represents the enduring power of light and the promise of renewal, reminding us that even in the most challenging of times, light will return. The very act of lighting a candle is a spiritual statement that despite the shadows that fall upon our lives, we can always find light within ourselves or through our connections with others. The symbolism of light in winter rituals is deeply psychological as well. Light represents clarity, understanding, and revelation, while darkness embodies mystery, uncertainty, and even fear. During the long, cold nights of winter, the darkness can feel suffocating. It can represent emotional or spiritual isolation, the dark night of the soul that many face during times of personal crisis or reflection. However, it is in this same darkness that light becomes most meaningful. Just as the stars shine brightest against the backdrop of the night sky, so too does hope and understanding shine brightest when we are confronted with life's most difficult moments. In lighting candles or adorning the darkened world with lights, we are symbolically casting out that darkness, not by defeating it, but by embracing it and allowing light to emerge from it. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year, serves as a particularly potent moment in this symbolism. For many ancient cultures, the solstice was a time when the sun died and was reborn. The darkness of the solstice night represented death and the unknown, but with the return of the sun came the promise of new life, warmth, and growth. The cyclical nature of this event, death, followed by rebirth, mirrors the larger cycles of life and death that all humans experience. The solstice, as a moment when the light triumphs over the dark, speaks to the universal desire for renewal, hope, and redemption. Even though darkness will return each year, we know that it will always give way to light once again. Across cultures, this duality of light and darkness can be seen in numerous winter traditions. In ancient Rome, the festival of Saturnalia, which occurred around the time of the solstice, involved decorating homes with lights and celebrating the return of the sun. The festival was both a time of joy and a reminder of the constant cycle of life and death. Similarly, in many indigenous cultures, winter solstice rituals often involved the lighting of fires or the use of candles to symbolize the triumph of the sun over the cold darkness of winter. These rituals were not just practical, they were metaphysical, offering a way to cope with the seasonal darkness and to honor the powerful, cyclical forces of nature. The lighting of the menorah during Hanukkah is another profound expression of the symbolism of light. The Jewish tradition centers on the miracle of the oil that lasted for 8 days in the temple's menorah, symbolizing divine presence and perseverance through hardship. Each candle lit during Hanukkah represents both the divine light and the strength of the Jewish people, who, throughout history, have often faced persecution and darkness. The menorah, like the Christmas lights and the Yule log, serves as a beacon of hope, shining against the backdrop of winter's long nights. In more recent times, the symbolic use of light during the winter months has become widespread, transcending religious and cultural boundaries. In Western societies, Christmas lights have evolved from simple, traditional displays to elaborate, glittering decorations that blanket homes and entire neighborhoods. While the original purpose of Christmas lights was to celebrate the birth of Christ and the return of light, today they often serve as a more secular reminder of the season's joy and the warmth of family and community. Yet, even in this modern context, the act of illuminating the darkness continues to reflect the deeper, timeless themes of hope, connection, and renewal. The symbolism of darkness, however, should not be overlooked. Darkness is not only something to overcome, it is also a necessary part of the human experience. It represents mystery, the unknown, and the cycles of life and death. Darkness, in this sense, is not purely negative. It is the container of potential, the space in which transformation occurs. Just as a seed must be buried in the earth's darkness to grow, so too do we need periods of stillness, introspection, and reflection to evolve. In the silence of winter, the seeds of future growth, both personal and spiritual, are planted. Moreover, darkness can also represent acceptance of the cyclical nature of life. Winter, with its long nights and quiet landscapes, forces us to acknowledge that life is not linear. We move through cycles of light and darkness, success and failure, life and death. The balance of opposites, light and dark, life and death, forms the foundation of many spiritual and philosophical teachings. Embracing the darkness of winter allows us to more fully appreciate the light that follows. By accepting both the dark and the light, we find a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Modern winter traditions continue to reflect this balance between light and darkness, but they are often more layered and complex than simply celebrating the return of the sun. For many, the lighting of candles, the display of Christmas lights, and the celebration of the solstice are not just acts of external illumination, they are also personal practices that invite introspection, healing, and renewal. The rituals of winter, rooted in ancient traditions, continue to offer a space for reflection, both on the larger cycles of nature and on the personal journeys we undertake throughout our lives. As we explore the deeper meanings of winter traditions, it becomes clear that the symbolism of light and darkness is central to our understanding of the season. These dualities are not merely abstract concepts, they are lived experiences that connect us to the natural world, to our spiritual selves, and to each other. The interplay of light and darkness in winter rituals reflects the cycles of life, the growth that comes from reflection and rest, and the inevitable return of hope and renewal. In the next section, we will delve deeper into how the cyclical nature of winter, the ebb and flow of life and death, light and darkness, shapes our understanding of human existence. We will explore how these cycles reflect not just the rhythms of nature, but the ongoing journey of self-discovery and spiritual awakening that defines the human experience. What if winter isn't the end, but the most important part of the cycle? Could the darkest season be the key to understanding the very nature of existence? Throughout history, winter has been viewed as a time of death and dormancy, when the natural world appears to retreat into stillness. The cold and the darkness seem to dominate, and life appears to vanish. Yet, this period of stillness is not the end. It is an essential part of the cycle that inevitably leads to renewal. Just as the earth rests in winter, so too do humans experience moments of rest, reflection, and renewal in our lives. Winter, far from being merely a time of hardship, is a profound reminder that endings are necessary for new beginnings. The cyclical nature of existence is reflected in many winter traditions, especially in those that honor the winter solstice. For ancient agricultural societies, winter was not just a time of cold and scarcity, it was a critical period in the cycle of life. The harsh winter months represented the death of the old year, but this death was necessary for the growth and rebirth that would come in the spring. These societies, deeply connected to the rhythms of nature, understood that the earth's apparent dormancy during winter was not a permanent state. Just as crops needed to be planted, grow, die, and then regenerate, so too did human lives follow cyclical patterns of growth, decline, and renewal. Winter was a time to rest and reflect on the lessons of the past year, but it also held the promise of new beginnings. In many cultures, the winter solstice was not only the longest night of the year, but also the moment when the light, both literal and metaphorical, began to return. This return of the light symbolized the triumph of life over death and the promise of renewal. The solstice represented a cosmic pause, a moment when the cycles of nature could be reflected upon and celebrated. The seemingly dormant winter landscape was actually full of potential as the earth rested, readying itself for the coming growth. The idea that death is a part of the cycle of life, a necessary step before rebirth, is a theme that runs through many of the world's winter traditions. From the lighting of candles in the darkest months to the solstice rituals that celebrate both the end of the year and the return of light. Winter's association with death and rebirth mirrors the human experience. Much like the cycles of nature, our lives move through periods of growth, stagnation, and transformation. Personal crises, endings, or moments of despair often mirror the harshness of winter, while the promise of renewal, personal growth, and transformation is akin to the return of spring. Just as nature must go through the process of dormancy before it can begin anew, so too do humans need periods of reflection and rest to grow and evolve. Winter offers a time to pause, to reflect on the past, and to prepare for the changes that will come. The end of a cycle, whether in nature, in relationships, or in personal development, holds the seeds of a new beginning. This cyclical understanding of life and death is not limited to the natural world. It is mirrored in the spiritual traditions that have been passed down through the ages. In many cultures, winter rituals honor the ancestors and the spirits of the departed, acknowledging the interconnectedness between life and death. In doing so, these rituals offer a sense of continuity, reinforcing the idea that while physical death may come, the cycle continues. Death is not the end, but a transition, a necessary part of a larger cosmic order that ensures the renewal of life. The winter season, with its darkness and stillness, provides the space for reflection on this eternal cycle and offers a time to honor both the past and the future. In modern times, the symbolism of winter and its connection to cycles of life, death, and rebirth remains deeply relevant. Many people find that winter, despite its challenges, offers the perfect environment for personal growth and transformation. The quiet of winter provides an opportunity to slow down, reflect, and set intentions for the future. In a world that often moves too quickly, winter serves as a reminder that stillness is necessary for growth. The long nights offer a space to embrace introspection, to consider what has come to an end, and to prepare for the new possibilities that await. This seasonal pause allows individuals to reconnect with themselves and with their larger spiritual or philosophical beliefs, finding meaning in the cyclical nature of their own lives. The symbolism of winter's darkness and the eventual return of the light can also offer insights into the human condition. Just as the earth undergoes periods of rest and renewal, so too does the human spirit. The winter season's association with both death and rebirth reflects the reality that life is composed of both ends and beginnings. Winter teaches us that darkness is not to be feared. Rather, it is an inevitable part of the human experience. Just as the sun will return after the solstice, so too can personal transformation occur after periods of struggle, loss, or hardship. Embracing the darkness, as winter traditions encourage, can lead to spiritual awakening, personal growth, and an understanding that every cycle of death is followed by a rebirth. This cyclical nature of winter and its philosophical implications are not just confined to ancient traditions. They resonate deeply with contemporary life, reminding us that in every ending, there is the potential for something new to begin. Whether through personal reflection, the renewal of relationships, or spiritual awakening, winter offers the opportunity to confront the darker aspects of existence and find meaning in them. The darkness of winter is not the end, it is simply a part of the ongoing cycle of life, death, and rebirth that governs the natural world and the human experience. As we reconnect with these ancient winter traditions, we find that they carry timeless lessons about the cyclical nature of existence. But how can these revived traditions inform our understanding of the human experience in the modern world? What new revelations await us about our lives, our relationships, and our place in the world? In the final chapter, we will reflect on how these rediscovered traditions can guide us in the 21st century, helping us navigate the complexities of life, death, and rebirth in a world that is constantly changing. Could the solstice celebrations that were once wiped out by history be returning in a new form? What does this resurgence mean for how we understand winter today? As modern life becomes increasingly fast-paced, disconnected from the natural world, and often dominated by commercialized holiday celebrations, many people are searching for ways to reconnect with deeper, more meaningful traditions. One of the most profound revivals in recent years has been the resurgence of winter solstice celebrations. Once suppressed, forgotten, or altered, these ancient rituals are finding new life in contemporary culture. From neo-pagan groups to environmentalists and spiritual seekers, people today are embracing the symbolic power of the winter solstice, rediscovering its ancient customs and adapting them for the modern world. The winter solstice has always been a time of great significance. For centuries, it marked not only the longest night of the year, but also a cosmic turning point, a moment when the darkness of winter gives way to the return of the sun, symbolizing the rebirth of light and the promise of renewal. Ancient cultures celebrated this event with bonfires, rituals, feasts, and ceremonies to honor the sun and usher in a new cycle of growth. However, with the rise of Christianity and the industrialization of society, many of these traditions were either absorbed into other holidays or abandoned altogether. The winter solstice became overshadowed by the commercialization of Christmas and the secularization of other winter celebrations. Yet, in recent decades, there has been a significant resurgence in the celebration of the solstice, particularly in spiritual, ecological, and neo-pagan communities. The solstice offers a unique opportunity to pause, reflect, and reconnect with the natural world, a stark contrast to the consumer-driven frenzy of modern holiday seasons. People are rediscovering the powerful symbolism of the solstice, which represents not only the return of the sun, but also the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth. These celebrations are often framed within the context of personal renewal, spiritual growth, and ecological responsibility, reflecting a growing desire to reclaim ancient wisdom and adapt it to contemporary life. One of the most famous solstice celebrations is held at Stonehenge in the United Kingdom, where thousands of people gather to watch the sunrise on the morning of the winter solstice. For many, this event is not just about witnessing a natural phenomenon, it is a spiritual experience. The alignment of Stonehenge with the sunrise during the solstice suggests that ancient people recognized the cosmic significance of this event, and modern-day participants continue to honor that tradition. The gathering at Stonehenge is marked by ritualistic elements, including drumming, singing, and prayers, connecting people to the ancient past while celebrating the enduring power of the sun. Similarly, the Winter Solstice Festival in Sedona, Arizona, draws thousands of attendees each year. Sedona is known for its spiritual energy, and the festival celebrates the solstice with a variety of activities, including meditation, yoga, and community feasts. These gatherings often include lighting candles, creating altars, and holding ceremonies to honor the elements and the return of the sun. For many participants, the solstice is a time to reflect on the past year, release old energies, and set intentions for the future. The celebration is a blend of ancient traditions and modern spiritual practices, offering a space for healing, renewal, and connection to the cycles of nature. The solstice celebrations that are gaining popularity today are more than just a revival of ancient customs. They represent a reimagining of these traditions for the modern world. In neo-pagan circles, the winter solstice, or Yule, is one of the 8 Sabbats in the Wheel of the Year, a series of seasonal festivals that honor the cycles of nature. For these communities, the solstice is not just about the return of the sun, but also about spiritual transformation. It is a time to honor the darkness as a necessary part of the cycle of life, and to reflect on the lessons that can be learned from periods of stillness and introspection. The solstice offers a space to acknowledge the endings and losses of the past year, and to prepare for the new growth and opportunities that will emerge in the coming months. In addition to spiritual and neo-pagan communities, environmental groups are also embracing the solstice as a way to reconnect with the earth and honor the natural world. For many environmentalists, the winter solstice represents a time to reflect on humanity's relationship with nature, to acknowledge the damage caused by industrialization, and to renew a commitment to sustainability and ecological responsibility. Solstice celebrations, such as those held in nature reserves or eco-conscious communities, emphasize living in harmony with the Earth's rhythms and cycles. These modern solstice festivals often incorporate sustainable practices, such as using renewable energy, promoting local food sources, and reducing waste. The rituals, while honoring ancient customs, are adapted to reflect contemporary concerns about environmental preservation and social responsibility. The winter solstice has also found a place in secular spiritual practices. For many people, the solstice represents a time of personal growth and transformation. It is a time to pause, reflect on the past year, and make space for the new. Rituals associated with the solstice, such as lighting candles, making wishes, or meditating, are becoming more common in secular settings, offering a chance to honor the season in a way that is personally meaningful. These practices may not have religious significance, but they are rooted in the same themes of introspection, renewal, and hope that have characterized solstice celebrations for centuries. The revival of solstice celebrations reflects a broader cultural trend towards rediscovery and renewal. As people become more aware of the spiritual and ecological significance of the winter solstice, they are reclaiming this ancient tradition and adapting it to fit modern values. These celebrations offer a deeper, more intentional way to mark the passage of time, one that emphasizes connection to the earth, community, and the cyclical nature of life. They provide an alternative to the commercialized frenzy of the holiday season, offering a space for reflection, growth, and spiritual connection. As we look at the resurgence of solstice celebrations, we can ask, what other ancient winter practices are being rediscovered and adapted in the modern world? How are these revived traditions reshaping the way we celebrate the season? In the next section, we will explore how these ancient customs are influencing modern holiday celebrations and what lessons they hold for us today. What if modern holidays could be transformed into something far more meaningful? What if ancient customs could guide us to rediscover the true spirit of winter? In recent years, there has been a growing movement to reclaim the deeper, more symbolic meanings of the winter holidays, infusing modern celebrations like Christmas, New Year's, and Hanukkah with elements from ancient winter traditions. These ancient customs, often centered around honoring the solstice, celebrating light's return, and reinforcing communal bonds, are being rediscovered and reinterpreted to create more intentional, meaningful ways of celebrating the season. From the lighting of candles to the re-emphasis on communal feasts, many modern holiday traditions are being adapted to honor not only the religious and secular aspects of winter celebrations, but also the deeper cycles of nature, life, and rebirth. One of the most profound shifts in modern holiday celebrations is the reclaiming of the solstice's ancient significance. For centuries, the winter solstice was a time to mark the rebirth of the sun, to celebrate the return of light after the longest night of the year. In the modern world, Christmas, with its heavy focus on consumerism, often eclipses this deeper, more universal meaning. However, many people are returning to the solstice's original symbolism of light and renewal. Whether through spiritual practices in neo-pagan communities or secular traditions that emphasize reflection and personal growth, the solstice is once again becoming a focal point for modern winter celebrations. Some families have begun to celebrate the solstice directly, holding rituals that involve lighting candles, sharing meals, or simply pausing to reflect on the cycles of life and the coming of new beginnings. These practices are infused with the same deep meanings that ancient cultures once honored: the triumph of light over darkness, the power of reflection and introspection, and the cyclical nature of time itself. Christmas, while still widely associated with consumerism and secular gift-giving, is also being reshaped by a return to its more spiritual roots. Many modern Christmas traditions, such as decorating Christmas trees, lighting candles, and gathering for communal meals, have their origins in ancient solstice celebrations. The Christmas tree, in particular, is a symbol of life's endurance through the dark months, a representation of the tree of life that ancient cultures celebrated during the solstice. As people rediscover the symbolic meaning behind the tree, they are reimagining this tradition as an opportunity to honor nature and reflect on the cycles of the seasons. Likewise, the act of lighting candles during the Christmas season, once a symbolic gesture to bring light into the darkest time of the year, is being embraced as a way to reconnect with the deeper meaning of the season, a reminder of hope, renewal, and the return of warmth. Similarly, the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, which falls near the winter solstice, has a rich history of symbolism related to light and darkness. The lighting of the menorah during Hanukkah, which commemorates the miracle of the oil that burned for 8 days, is a celebration of divine light in the face of darkness. In modern times, Hanukkah has evolved into a festive, family-oriented holiday, but its origins are deeply tied to the theme of spiritual renewal in the midst of hardship. Like Christmas, Hanukkah's focus on light as a source of hope resonates with the ancient tradition of celebrating the return of the sun during the solstice. Many Jewish families are now reclaiming this symbolic connection, emphasizing the spiritual aspects of the holiday and celebrating the menorah as a symbol of endurance, hope, and the strength to overcome adversity. New Year's Eve, traditionally a time for celebration and reflection, is another holiday where ancient customs are being revived. New Year's celebrations often involve gatherings, feasts, and toasts, marking the transition from one year to the next. While the focus is often on revelry, there is also a growing trend of using this time for reflection and personal growth, much like the solstice. In ancient cultures, the turning of the year was a time to honor the end of one cycle and prepare for the new one, often through rituals that involved cleansing, letting go of the old, and setting intentions for the future. Today, many people are returning to these ancient practices, using the new year as an opportunity to reflect on their lives, release old patterns, and embrace new possibilities. Practices such as making New Year's resolutions, setting intentions, and practicing gratitude are modern adaptations of the ancient custom of honoring the cycles of life and death. Alongside these more traditional winter holidays, alternative celebrations are also gaining popularity as people seek to create more meaningful and intentional ways of celebrating the season. Winter solstice festivals, eco-conscious holiday gatherings, and secular celebrations that emphasize community, spirituality, and connection to nature are on the rise. These celebrations often draw on a variety of cultural and spiritual practices, blending old and new traditions to create a celebration that reflects contemporary values. For example, some communities now hold winter solstice festivals that include meditation, reflection, and eco-friendly activities such as tree planting or recycling. These festivals are a response to the commercialization of the holiday season and offer a more intentional way to celebrate the passing of time, the return of the light, and the importance of living in harmony with nature. This resurgence of meaningful winter traditions reflects a broader cultural shift towards seeking depth and connection in our celebrations. In a world where the commercial pressures of the holiday season can overshadow the true spirit of the holidays, many people are turning to ancient customs for guidance. They are reclaiming the symbolic meanings of the winter season, celebrating not just the return of the light, but also the interconnectedness of life, nature, and community. These new celebrations are about more than just nostalgia. They are an effort to reconnect with the timeless wisdom of the past and adapt it to the challenges of the modern world. In this way, the ancient traditions of winter are being revitalized, offering a richer, more reflective way to celebrate the season. As these traditions are adapted and reimagined, they are creating new forms of meaning and connection. Whether through solstice festivals, eco-conscious gatherings, or simply reclaiming the deeper spiritual significance of Christmas and Hanukkah, modern holiday celebrations are being infused with the wisdom of the past. This growing trend of rediscovery and renewal offers a powerful reminder that the ancient practices of winter, while rooted in the past, are incredibly relevant today. They provide us with the tools to reconnect with nature, strengthen community bonds, and find deeper meaning in the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Looking ahead, these revived winter traditions are helping to guide us through the challenges of the modern world. As we explore how these ancient practices are shaping our understanding of the winter season, we will consider how they can help us navigate the complexities of modern life. In the next section, we will reflect on how these rediscovered winter traditions can offer guidance, healing, and connection as we face the challenges of the future. In a world that feels increasingly disconnected from nature, could ancient winter traditions be the key to restoring balance and meaning? What role can they play in our future? As we navigate a world marked by growing environmental crises, social isolation, and a pervasive sense of disconnection from the natural world, the rediscovery of ancient winter traditions offers us a powerful way to reconnect with the rhythms of nature, our communities, and ourselves. Winter traditions, once rooted in the cycles of the earth, provide us with a framework for understanding the complexities of modern life and the challenges we face. By embracing these ancient practices, we can find not only a sense of stability, but also the resilience, spiritual growth, and community needed to face the future with hope and purpose. In many ways, winter traditions have always been about more than just survival. They have served as an anchor in times of hardship, a way for individuals and communities to come together in the face of adversity. Whether through the lighting of candles to honor the return of light, or the celebration of the solstice as a time of renewal, these rituals offered people a sense of purpose and connection to something greater than themselves. Today, as we face increasingly complex challenges, from environmental degradation to social fragmentation, we can look to these ancient practices for guidance on how to reconnect with nature, rebuild community, and foster resilience in a rapidly changing world. Winter traditions that honor the cycles of nature provide a potent reminder of our place in the world and our relationship to the environment. In a time when human activity is accelerating climate change, depleting resources, and disrupting ecosystems, these rituals offer a chance to reflect on our interconnectedness with the earth and the importance of living in harmony with the natural world. The winter solstice, for example, symbolizes the triumph of light over darkness, a cosmic reminder that even the harshest seasons of life, both in nature and within us, are temporary. The return of light after the solstice reminds us that transformation is possible, even in the most difficult of circumstances. By honoring this cycle, we acknowledge that there is always hope for renewal, for regeneration, and for growth, no matter how bleak the world may seem. Furthermore, the act of celebrating the solstice and other winter traditions can help to heal the fractures in society. As modern life becomes more individualistic, with people becoming more disconnected from their communities and the rhythms of the earth, winter traditions offer a way to rebuild the social fabric. These rituals bring people together in a shared experience of reflection, celebration, and renewal. In an age where we often feel isolated by technology, fast-paced living, and a constant barrage of information, winter rituals provide a much-needed space for slowing down, reconnecting with one another, and honoring our collective humanity. The act of gathering around a hearth, lighting candles, sharing a meal, and reflecting on the past year is an inherently communal practice that reinforces the bonds that hold us together. These rituals remind us that, even in our individual struggles, we are not alone. We are part of something larger, part of a community, part of a cycle that is greater than any one of us. This communal aspect of winter traditions can also help address the social isolation that is becoming an increasingly pressing issue in the modern world. With the rise of technology, many of us have become more disconnected from face-to-face interactions and the rich traditions that once brought us together. Winter traditions offer an antidote to this isolation, providing a means of re-establishing meaningful connections with others. Celebrations that involve gathering, sharing stories, or performing rituals together foster a sense of belonging and mutual care. These practices offer not just a connection to the past, but to the people around us, creating opportunities for building stronger, more resilient communities. In addition to fostering community and connection, winter traditions offer a path to spiritual growth. The stillness of winter, with its long nights and quiet landscapes, creates a natural environment for introspection and reflection. Winter rituals invite us to pause and evaluate our lives, to release what no longer serves us, and to set intentions for the future. These practices offer a way to reconnect with our inner selves and our spiritual beliefs, regardless of religious affiliation. For some, the winter solstice provides a time to meditate on personal growth, to confront the shadows within, and to embrace the darkness as a necessary part of the human experience. In many cultures, winter has been seen as a time to honor death and rebirth, to accept the cyclical nature of existence, and to find peace in the face of uncertainty. As we navigate the challenges of modern life, these practices offer a way to cultivate resilience and wisdom, helping us navigate the inevitable ups and downs of our personal and collective journeys. Furthermore, as the world grapples with increasing environmental crises, the reclamation of winter traditions can offer practical, ecological lessons. Many of these traditions emphasize sustainable living and a deep respect for the Earth's natural rhythms. The act of lighting candles or building bonfires, for example, was once a way of bringing warmth and light into the cold, but it also served as a way of honoring fire as a sacred element of nature. Today, these practices can be adapted to reflect more eco-conscious choices. From using solar-powered lights during the solstice to organizing community events that promote sustainable practices, winter traditions can become powerful tools for environmental stewardship. By reconnecting with these ancient customs, we can learn to live in a more sustainable way, honor the planet, and reduce our ecological footprints. As we look ahead, winter traditions can serve as a bridge between the past and the future. In a time when the natural world is increasingly under threat, and when we face profound challenges as individuals and as a society, these rituals offer a way to restore balance, meaning, and resilience. By embracing the wisdom of ancient traditions, we can begin to heal the fractures in our relationship with the earth, with each other, and with ourselves. Winter traditions remind us that there is always room for renewal, for growth, and for transformation if we are willing to embrace the cycles of life and honor the rhythms of nature. These rituals offer us a chance to reconnect with what is truly important and create a more harmonious future for generations to come. As we reflect on the importance of winter traditions in our modern world, we can ask ourselves, what lessons can we learn from these ancient practices? How can they guide us through the challenges we face today? In the final chapter, we will explore how embracing the wisdom of the past can help us navigate the complexities of the modern world and build a future that is rooted in connection, community, and respect for the natural world. What if the forgotten traditions of winter were the key to unlocking a deeper, more meaningful life? How can we embrace them to create a future that honors the past and nourishes the soul? Throughout this exploration of winter traditions, we have uncovered the profound significance these rituals hold, both in our historical past and in their potential to guide us through the complexities of the modern world. The practices that once helped our ancestors survive the harshest months of the year, connect with nature's rhythms, and foster community spirit are now more relevant than ever. As we move forward, rediscovering and embracing these ancient winter customs can offer us a way not just to survive, but to thrive spiritually, emotionally, and ecologically. Winter traditions have always been a way to mark the passage of time, to acknowledge both the endings and the beginnings that accompany each season. These rituals help people cope with the darkness, isolation, and challenges that winter often brought. But, as we've seen, winter traditions were never just about surviving the cold, they were about transformation, reflection, and renewal. By celebrating the return of the light, acknowledging the cycles of life, and coming together as a community, ancient rituals provided both spiritual and emotional nourishment that transcended mere survival. They reminded people of their connection to the earth, to one another, and to something greater than themselves. This ancient wisdom, though often overlooked in today's fast-paced, disconnected world, can serve as a vital source of guidance for our modern lives. In today's world, where we face environmental crises, social fragmentation, and a general sense of disconnection from nature, the rediscovery of these winter traditions offers a way to restore balance and meaning. Many of us have lost touch with the natural cycles that once guided our daily lives, seasons that were once a clear framework for growth, renewal, and reflection. As we've learned, winter is not just a time of dormancy, but a time for introspection, renewal, and spiritual awakening. It is a time to reflect on the past, honor the present, and prepare for the future. By reconnecting with the rituals of our ancestors, whether through solstice celebrations, communal feasts, or acts of ecological stewardship, we can rediscover a path that brings us closer to the earth, to our communities, and to the deeper aspects of ourselves. Winter traditions offer more than just symbolic warmth and light during the darkest months. They provide us with a template for how to navigate life's more difficult seasons. The cycles of life, death, and rebirth that winter rituals embody are as relevant today as they were in ancient times. By embracing the wisdom of these traditions, we are reminded that challenges and periods of darkness are not permanent. They are part of the natural order, and they pave the way for growth, transformation, and new beginnings. The seasonal cycles of nature remind us that no matter how long or difficult the winter may seem, the light will always return. In our own lives, this understanding can help us face adversity with resilience, knowing that it too is part of a larger cycle that ultimately leads to renewal. Moreover, the communal aspects of winter rituals, coming together to share food, light candles, or celebrate the solstice, are a vital antidote to the isolation and individualism that often characterize modern life. As we move forward in a world that can feel increasingly disconnected and fragmented, these traditions remind us of the importance of community, of supporting each other, and of finding meaning in our shared experiences. In a time when many people feel alienated or disconnected from others, winter traditions offer a way to rebuild social bonds, strengthen relationships, and cultivate a deeper sense of belonging. Ecologically, winter traditions also offer us a blueprint for how to live more in harmony with the earth. As we face climate change, environmental destruction, and a general disregard for the planet's well-being, many of the values embedded in ancient winter rituals are more pressing than ever. By honoring the natural world and its cycles, we are reminded of our role as stewards of the earth. The practices of sustainability, respect for nature, and gratitude for the resources we have were at the heart of winter traditions in agrarian societies. Today, these practices can be adapted to help us live more consciously and responsibly, ensuring that the Earth's resources are respected and preserved for future generations. Whether through eco-friendly celebrations, sustainable living practices, or simply taking the time to appreciate the beauty and wisdom of nature, winter traditions can help us reorient ourselves toward a more harmonious relationship with the Earth. Looking forward, the future of winter traditions lies in their ability to blend the wisdom of the past with the needs of the present. As we've seen, these rituals are not static. They evolve, adapt, and find new forms in response to changing circumstances. The revival of solstice celebrations, the rediscovery of ancient customs, and the rise of eco-conscious holidays are all examples of how winter traditions are being reshaped to meet the challenges of modern life. By embracing these revived practices, we are not only honoring our ancestors and their wisdom, but also creating new ways to celebrate, reflect, and grow in our own time. The future of winter traditions is about creating a world that honors the cycles of nature, rebuilds community connections, and fosters spiritual and ecological growth. As we embrace the forgotten traditions of winter, we can rediscover a sense of meaning, stability, and hope that transcends the noise and distractions of modern life. In doing so, we are reminded that the most profound insights often come from looking back to the rhythms of nature, the wisdom of our ancestors, and the timeless cycles that govern life on Earth. As we close this journey into the rediscovery of winter traditions, we are left with a question: how can we carry the lessons of these ancient practices into our modern lives? How can embracing the past, through winter rituals, help shape a more harmonious and resilient future? By reconnecting with these traditions, we can create a world that honors the natural cycles, fosters deeper connections to one another, and nurtures our shared spiritual growth. The future of winter traditions lies in their ability to guide us through the challenges of the modern world, helping us restore balance, meaning, and connection to the Earth, each other, and ourselves.